The abyss, a metaphorical chasm that spans the breadth of human understanding and experience. This enigmatic void, deep and unfathomable, serves as a crucible for the soul, a nexus of the profound and the ineffable. It is where the stark light of consciousness meets the impenetrable darkness of the unknown, a boundary marking the limits of rational thought and the beginning of transcendental mystery. The abyss is a dark and bottomless realm, where heroes make their last stand. The abyss personifies the infinite depth of our psychological complexity. It is a place of untold danger where we struggle to confront the deepest, darkest parts of ourselves. Throughout history, the abyss has whispered to philosophers, beckoned to mystics, and challenged the bravest of explorers of the human condition. It represents not just a gap in knowledge or belief, but a space of transformation. In psychology, it is the deep well of the unconscious, filled with the uncharted territories of the psyche. For existentialists, it embodies the ultimate confrontation with meaninglessness, a leap into the void from which emerges personal authenticity and freedom. In the realm of the occult, it symbolizes the great divide to be crossed, a dissolution of ego that unites the seeker with the divine. The abyss, therefore, is not a singular concept, but a multifaceted symbol of the limits and possibilities of human experience. It invites a journey not of the body, but of the mind and spirit, a descent into the depths of self and the universe. Here, in the silence and the darkness, lies the potential for transformation. For it is only by confronting the abyss, by gazing into its depths, that one can hope to glean the truths that shimmer.
I need to do this.
In the void. Thus begins our exploration into the abyss. A journey that promises no easy answers, but offers the possibility of encountering the very essence of existence itself. Outside of the world is diffused the infinite void, which is incorporeal. By incorporeal is meant that which, though capable of being occupied by body, is not so occupied. The world has no empty space within it, but forms one united whole. The void is the philosophical concept of nothingness manifested. The notion of the void is relevant to several realms of metaphysics. The manifestation of nothingness is closely associated with the contemplation of emptiness, and with human attempts to identify and personify it. As such, the concept of the void, and ideas similar to it, have a significant and historically evolving presence in artistic and creative expression, as well as in academic, scientific, and philosophical debates surrounding the nature of the human condition. The abyss serves as a representation of the existential void, a central theme in existentialist thought. This void, or abyss, is not just a mere absence, but a space that confronts individuals with the inherent meaninglessness and absurdity of existence. It challenges the foundations upon which life's certainties are built, posing existential questions that lack easy answers. Philosophers like Søren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche have made significant contributions to our understanding of this concept, exploring the courage required to face it and the existential transformation that can result. Kierkegaard, often considered the father of existentialism, introduced the idea of the leap of faith as a response to the existential void. He believed that in the face of life's absurdity and the sickness unto death, a term he used to describe the despair arising from the realization of one's true self and the responsibilities that come with it, one must make a conscious leap into faith. This faith is not necessarily religious, but represents a commitment to a set of beliefs or values that imbue life with meaning. For Kierkegaard, confronting the abyss is an intensely personal journey that requires one to acknowledge their individuality and the angst that comes with the freedom of choice. He argued that this existential challenge is not about finding abstract or universal truths, but rather about discovering what is authentically meaningful to oneself. This process of self-discovery and commitment often demands confronting deep-seated fears and uncertainties, which is where the concept of the leap arises. It involves a radical choice to trust in one's chosen path, despite the inherent unpredictability and potential despair. Kierkegaard's philosophy emphasizes that true faith requires a personal risk, a venture into the unknown, where no empirical evidence can guarantee success. Thus, the leap of faith becomes a metaphor for the act of believing in one's own reasons for living, transcending the logical frameworks that fail to fully capture the complexities of human existence. Through this act, one asserts their existence and defines their essence through the choices they make, thereby creating an authentic life despite the chaos and uncertainty that may surround them. Nietzsche's exploration of the abyss is perhaps more nihilistic, although it ultimately serves a similar transformative purpose. His assertion, if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you, captures the dual nature of this confrontation. Nietzsche sees the abyss as the ultimate realization of the lack of inherent meaning in the universe. A realization that can either destroy an individual or serve as the catalyst for the creation of new values. This moment of gazing into the abyss and it gazing back represents the existential dread that can lead to what Nietzsche calls the Übermensch, or overman, an individual who has overcome the conventional values of society and created their own meaning in the face of existential despair. Nietzsche believed that this encounter with the abyss challenges one to either succumb to nihilism or rise above it by affirming life through the will to power. He proposed that facing the abyss is an essential step in the philosophical maturation of the individual, compelling them to confront and reconcile with the emptiness and meaninglessness perceived in the world. Through this confrontation, one is given the opportunity to reject passive nihilism and instead embrace active nihilism, which encourages the creation of personal values and purposes. Nietzsche's concept of the eternal recurrence plays a significant role in this context, where one must live one's life as though it would be repeated infinitely, thus choosing to live a life worthy of reliving. This philosophical exercise forces the individual to evaluate their actions and decisions, to ensure that their life aligns with the values they have courageously forged in response to the recognition of the abyss. Nietzsche's philosophy does not just acknowledge the darkness, but uses it as a crucible for forging a stronger, more deliberate sense of self and purpose. Thus, his exploration of the abyss is not merely a descent into despair, but a call to individual renaissance and transformation. Both Kierkegaard and Nietzsche underscore the bravery needed not just to face the abyss, but to dive into its depths. This entails more than a mere acknowledgement of its presence. It demands an active confrontation with the very core of one's existence, challenging one's preconceived notions and the comfort of inherited truths. It's about daring to question the very ground upon which one stands, and in the face of overwhelming uncertainty and existential dread, to forge a path that is uniquely one's own. This journey into the abyss is laden with existential dread, an unsettling awareness of one's minuscule stature against the vastness of the universe, coupled with the recognition of the absolute freedom and the weighty responsibility that comes with crafting one's personal meaning. It's a process that pushes one to the edge of despair, testing one's resolve to either succumb to nihilism or to rise above it, armed with a newfound sense of purpose and authenticity. Through this ordeal, one confronts the deepest fears and doubts with a resilient spirit and a philosophy carved out of the very bedrock of existential truth. The transformative potential of facing the abyss is deeply embedded in the struggle it incites, a struggle that is both terrifying and liberating. By daring to stare into the void, to engage with the uncertainties and existential quandaries it represents, individuals are presented with a unique opportunity not just for introspection, but for radical self-transformation. This confrontation with the abyss acts as a catalyst for existential rebirth, prompting a deep and often painful re-evaluation of one's beliefs, values, and assumptions about the nature of existence itself. It forces us to question not only who we are, but also who we aspire to be, challenging us to dismantle and rebuild our understanding of ourselves.
New Zealand. Located near the geographic center of the South Island, Lake Benmore is the largest human-made body of water in New Zealand. Really? The lake was formed in the early 1960s with the completion of an earthen dam along the Waitaki River. The lake and its surroundings are popular year-round, with tourists who come to explore rolling hills, gorges, and miles of shoreline. Wait, hold on. Soaring above the lake brings incredible views of the entire region as well as individual facets of the landscape. Running ridges in search of ridge lift and seeking thermals in the DG Aviation DG1001E Neo gives aviators a wonderful opportunity to silently explore and immerse themselves. This part of New Zealand. Okay, let's try that. I haven't been banned, have I? Let me just check really quick. Okay.
Ourselves and our place in the world. Moreover, the abyss serves as a reminder of our own finitude and the inherent limitations of human understanding, pushing us towards a more genuine engagement with life's complexities. It encourages a kind of existential resilience, an ability to face life's inherent absurdities and uncertainties without succumbing to despair. Through this grueling process, we are offered the chance to forge a connection with the essence of our being, to discover a sense of purpose that is deeply felt and uniquely our own. The Abyss does not just challenge us to confront the most important questions of existence. It invites us to find our own answers. The concept of the Abyss in the Bible captures a multifaceted spectrum of meanings, each integrated with the theological, cosmological, and eschatological narratives of the scriptures. From its earliest mentions to its apocalyptic significations, the Abyss serves as a backdrop against which the drama of creation, judgment, and redemption unfolds. In the Hebrew Bible, the term tehom, translated as the deep or abyss, refers to the primordial waters of chaos that existed before the ordered world came into being. Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 portrays the Spirit of God moving over the face of these waters, signifying the abyss as the state of unformed potential preceding creation. This imagery echoes across various ancient Near Eastern creation myths, where primordial waters often symbolize the pre-creation chaos. The abyss also denotes the depths of the sea or ocean, reflecting humanity's ancient perceptions of the sea as a vast, mysterious, and often terrifying realm. It embodies the unknown depths beneath the surface of the world, places unreachable and incomprehensible to humans. Additionally, in later Jewish thought, the concept of the abyss expanded to encompass the underworld in Hebrew thought, a place of darkness to which the dead go, or even a domain associated with rebellious spirits or demons, highlighting the abyss's association with the realms of death and judgment. In the New Testament, the abyss retains its ominous overtones, becoming explicitly associated with the domain of demons and the prison of evil spirits. The Gospel of Luke recounts how Jesus grants permission for demons to enter a herd of swine, which then rushes into the sea, an act symbolizing the casting of evil back into the abyss. Similarly, the Apostle Paul and the apocalyptic visions in the Book of Revelation utilize the abyss to describe the abode of the dead and the prison for demonic entities, including Satan himself, who is bound and cast into the abyss for 1,000 years. The abyss in biblical literature thus functions as a potent symbol of God's mastery over chaos, evil, and death. It represents both the antithetical force to divine order and the eventual subjugation of all rebellious entities under God's sovereign rule. The imagery of the abyss, particularly in apocalyptic texts, serves to underscore the cosmic struggle between good and evil, culminating in the final victory of God and the establishment of a new creation free from chaos, sin, and death. The poetic expression from Psalm 42, "Deep calls to deep," captures the soul's yearning for God amidst the tumults of life, symbolized by the overwhelming waters of chaos. This verse encapsulates the human experience of seeking God in the midst of suffering and despair, highlighting the abyss not just as a physical or spiritual realm, but as a metaphor for the depths of the human condition in its longing for the divine. In Gnostic texts, such as On the Origin of the World, the abyss takes on additional layers of meaning. often representing the cosmic struggle between divine and demiurgic or archonic forces. The Gnostics envisioned a complex cosmology where Sophia, or wisdom, a key figure in Gnostic thought, plays a pivotal role in the eventual overthrow of the archons, casting them into the abyss as a judgment for their tyranny and injustice. This reflects a broader theme in Gnostic cosmology of liberation from the material world and the ascendancy of spiritual knowledge, or gnosis. The biblical concept of the abyss thus encompasses a vast array of interpretations and significances, ranging from the primordial state of creation to the ultimate destination for evil forces, serving as a backdrop against which the themes of creation, judgment, redemption, and human longing for the divine unfold. The abyss, as a literary motif, delves into the often unsettling depths that lie beneath the surface of existence. In literature, it symbolizes the great unknown, the uncharted territories of the human psyche, and the existential vacuum that characters and by extension readers might encounter. Its representation spans a broad spectrum of darkness, mystery, and terror, wherein characters are compelled to confront their fears and the outermost boundaries of human comprehension. The thematic resonance of the abyss within the broader expanse of literature is vast and varied. It encapsulates a range of themes, from the turmoil of grappling with internal demons and the sense of existential despair to the awe and fear inspired by encounters with the supernatural. It signifies moments or locations where the veneer of the familiar and comprehensible world is stripped away, thrusting characters and vicariously readers into the vastness of the unknown. The manifestation of the abyss within literature can take on concrete forms, such as the ominous depths of dark forests, the boundless mysteries of the deep ocean, or the hidden dangers of mysterious caverns. Equally, it can be represented through more abstract concepts, such as the labyrinthine complexities of dreams, the disorienting spiral into madness, or the finality and uncertainty of death. Throughout literary history, numerous works have employed the abyss to explore these themes in rich and compelling ways. Dante's Inferno offers a seminal exploration of the abyss, where the poet embarks on a descent through the circles of hell. This journey is not just a geographical exploration of a mythic underworld, but a contemplation of sin, redemption, and the human condition, casting the abyss as both a literal and metaphorical space of introspection and transformation. Similarly, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness takes readers on a journey into the African Congo, which serves as a backdrop for an exploration into the darkness of the human soul. Conrad's narrative delves into the heart of colonialism, racism, and the existential dread of confronting the unknown, both within the world and within oneself. These examples underscore the abyss's enduring appeal and versatility as a literary motif. It embodies the quintessential struggle with the unknown, serving as a mirror to our deepest fears and aspirations. Whether through epic journeys into fantastical underworlds or introspective voyages into the psyche, literature's engagement with the abyss invites readers to confront the essential mysteries of life, death, and existence. It challenges us to gaze into the depths of our own souls and to acknowledge the vast, often incomprehensible forces that shape our lives. Through this engagement, the abyss transcends its role as a narrative device, becoming a space for existential inquiry and reflection. urging us to ponder our place in the cosmos and the nature of the darkness that lies both around and within us. H.P. Lovecraft's literary work of art stands as a towering monument to the theme of the abyss, a concept he infused with unparalleled depth and darkness within the genre of cosmic horror, a genre he himself was instrumental in carving out. Through his imaginative and terrifying tales, Lovecraft transcended the conventional horror of his time, which often focused on tangible, earthly fears. Instead, he ventured into the realm of the existential and cosmic, presenting the abyss not merely as a physical chasm or a psychological depth, but as a vast, unknowable universe that dwarfed and negated human significance. Lovecraft's conception of the abyss is central to the ethos of cosmic horror, which posits the universe as not only indifferent to humanity, but also inherently incomprehensible and hostile. His narratives often revolve around protagonists who, whether through scholarly pursuit, insatiable curiosity, or sheer happenstance, come into contact with ancient extraterrestrial entities or stumble upon arcane knowledge. These encounters expose the characters, and through them, the readers, to the chilling revelation that what they understood about the universe barely scratches the surface of a much darker reality. The physical settings in Lovecraft's stories are meticulously crafted to serve as conduits to the abyss. The sunken city where Cthulhu awaits is perhaps the most iconic of these locations. It is a place that defies the laws of physics as understood by human minds, a literal and metaphorical submersion into the depths of the abyss where ancient powers lie dormant. Similarly, places like the decaying, witch-haunted town of Arkham and the blasted heath of Dunwich serve as intersections between the known world and the cosmic void beyond. Through his vivid descriptions and complex mythos, Lovecraft invites readers to peer over the edge into the abyss, confronting the terror of what lies beneath. Lovecraft's abyss is inexorably tied to the concept of non-Euclidean geometry and other dimensions. Ideas that defy conventional understanding and stand as metaphors for the limits of human cognition. This exploration of incomprehensibility is not just a thematic preference, but a philosophical stance. The universe, in its true form, is beyond the realms of human understanding, and any attempt to comprehend it is futile, if not downright dangerous. Lovecraft's characters often pay a steep price for their curiosity, descending into madness as their minds are unable to reconcile their discoveries with the reality they once knew. At the heart of Lovecraft's exploration of the abyss is the theme of existential dread, stemming from the realization of humanity's inconsequential place in the cosmos. His characters are frequently confronted with the terrifying vastness of the universe and the realization that human life, with all its concerns, ambitions, and fears, is but a fleeting, insignificant blip in the cosmic timeline. This revelation often leads to despair, madness, or a nihilistic acceptance of the absurdity of existence. Lovecraft's abyss, with its layers of existential, cosmic, and psychological horror, has left an indelible mark on the genre and beyond. His work invites us to confront our fears, not of ghosts or monsters, but of the unknown itself and our place within it. The chilling allure of Lovecraft's abyss lies in its ability to make us question, to unsettle our grasp on reality, and to remind us of the fragility of our understanding of the universe. Through his cosmic horror lens, Lovecraft not only expanded the boundaries of horror literature, but also offered a unique perspective on the human condition, one where facing the abyss is an inevitable, though harrowing, path to enlightenment or oblivion. The abyss represents an often daunting realm, the uncharted territories of the human psyche. This concept transcends mere metaphor, touching the core of our being and the mysteries that lie within. Renowned psychologist Carl Jung contributed significantly to our understanding of these depths, introducing the notion of the collective unconscious, a vast, shared reservoir of archetypes and psychic material that remains largely unexplored and unprocessed within the individual's conscious mind. Jung's collective unconscious is not a mere repository of forgotten memories, but a wellspring of universal symbols and motifs, archetypes that shape human behavior and experience. These archetypes, such as the shadow, the anima and animus, and the self, represent the various facets of our psyche that we inherit from our collective human past. However, it is the shadow archetype that most closely aligns with the notion of the abyss. It encompasses the darker aspects of our personality, those parts of ourselves we deny or reject because they do not align with our conscious self-image. The journey into the abyss, therefore, becomes a pivotal quest for wholeness and self-discovery. It requires a confrontation with the shadow self, an encounter with those repressed or ignored elements of our personality. This is not a venture for the faint-hearted, as it involves delving into the deepest, most concealed layers of our psyche, where unresolved conflicts, fears, and desires reside. It is a descent into the dark night of the soul, where one must face their innermost demons and integrate these shadow aspects into conscious awareness. This process of integration is crucial for achieving psychological growth and wholeness. Ignoring or suppressing the shadow can lead to psychological imbalance and manifest as projection, seeing our own unacceptable qualities in others rather than acknowledging them within ourselves. Conversely, acknowledging and integrating our shadow aspects allows us to access a fuller understanding of ourselves, leading to increased empathy for others and a more authentic life. Moreover, the concept of the abyss extends beyond the individual's confrontation with the shadow, touching upon the existential angst and the universal quest for meaning. It reflects the human condition's inherent uncertainty and the perpetual struggle to find purpose in the chaos of existence. This resonates with Jung's later work on the process of individuation, the lifelong psychological process of differentiation of the self out of each individual's conscious and unconscious elements. Diving into the abyss, in the Jungian sense, thus represents a vital passage towards self-realization. It is a journey marked by trials and revelations, where the traveler emerges not only more self-aware, but also more profoundly connected to the collective human experience. This exploration fosters a deeper understanding of the psychic forces that shape our thoughts, behaviors, and interactions with the world around us. The psychological abyss, then, is not a pit of despair, but a crucible of transformation. It invites us to confront our innermost selves, to wrestle with the complexities of our psyche, and ultimately, to embark on the path toward integration and wholeness. In doing so, it challenges us to transcend our limitations, to reconcile with our darker selves, and to forge a more authentic and meaningful existence. In spiritual narratives and traditions, the abyss occupies a significant place, often symbolizing the most challenging phases of the spiritual journey. This concept, akin to the dark night of the soul as described by St. John of the Cross, serves as a metaphor for the periods of spiritual desolation that precede renewal and deeper understanding. This dark night represents a pivotal moment of transition, where the soul experiences a deep sense of abandonment, despair, and separation from the divine, a spiritual crisis that paradoxically holds the potential for transformation and enlightenment. The spiritual abyss is characterized by a feeling of loss and emptiness, where all previous understandings and experiences of the divine seem to vanish, leaving the soul in darkness. This period is marked by intense emotional turmoil, including doubts about one's faith, a sense of meaninglessness, and the fear that one has been abandoned by the divine. Yet, it's within this very darkness that the seeds of spiritual awakening are sown. The abyss is not a punishment, but a passage, a necessary void that challenges the soul to let go of old identities, beliefs, and attachments, to make room for a more direct experience of the divine. The journey through the abyss is integral to the process of spiritual purification and enlightenment. It serves to strip away the superficial layers of the self, including the ego and its attachments, to reveal the true essence of the soul, unencumbered by illusion. This process of purification, though painful, is essential for achieving a deeper union with the divine, as it allows the individual to let go of everything that is not aligned with their true spiritual nature. Navigating the abyss is about surrendering to the unknown and trusting that this dark night of the soul is a necessary phase of spiritual evolution. While the term dark night of the soul originates from Christian mysticism, the concept of the abyss as a phase of spiritual crisis and renewal is present in many spiritual traditions. In Buddhism, for example, the notion of dukkha, or suffering, is central to the path towards enlightenment, underscoring the importance of understanding and transcending suffering to achieve nirvana. Similarly, in Hinduism, the concept of Maya, or illusion, points to the necessity of seeing beyond the superficial aspects of reality to connect with the Brahman, the ultimate reality. Each of these traditions, in their own way, acknowledges the importance of confronting and transcending inner darkness as a pathway to spiritual awakening. This doctrine is extremely difficult to explain, but it corresponds more or less to the gap in thought between the real, which is ideal, and the unreal, which is actual. In the abyss, all things exist indeed, at least in posse, but are without any possible meaning, for they lack the substratum of spiritual reality. They are appearances without law. They are thus insane delusions. Now the abyss being thus the great storehouse of phenomena, it is the source of all impressions. The concept of the abyss in occult traditions, particularly within the realms of Kabbalah as expounded by influential figures such as Aleister Crowley and members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, encapsulates an enigmatic stage of spiritual progression. It represents a pivotal juncture in a seeker's quest for enlightenment, marking the boundary between the corporeal and the celestial, between what is readily perceived and that which lies beyond mortal comprehension. Crossing the abyss is regarded as a perilous operation and the most important work in a magician's career. Success confers graduation to the degree of Magister Templi, which means Master of the Temple. At its core, the abyss transcends the mere idea of a void or gap to be crossed. It embodies the ultimate confrontation with the unknown, a realm where logic, reason, and even faith are tested against the sheer enormity of the infinite. Here, aspirants face the dissolution of form and concept, confronting the primal chaos that underpins existence. In this domain, the constructs of the ego and the individual self are deconstructed, revealing the illusory nature of separation between the self and the divine. Crowley's writings offer practical insights into traversing this profound stage. His published instructions on the abyss suggest that the student should contemplate a philosophical problem without resorting to magic or intuition, maintaining focus until the mind engages with this problem autonomously. Then will all phenomena which present themselves to him appear meaningless and disconnected, and his own ego will break up into a series of impressions having no relation to one another or with any other thing. This mental state prepares the student for the mystical experience Crowley refers to as Shivadarshana. Shivadarshana occurs as part of the ordeal of crossing the abyss, the great divide in the tree of life that separates the individual self from the universal divine awareness. The experience of Shivadarshana, therefore, represents a pinnacle moment where the practitioner experiences a direct and overwhelming insight into the nature of reality, typically characterized by the complete disintegration of the normal egoic self. This journey is not one to be undertaken lightly. It demands a complete surrender of one's preconceived notions and a willingness to embrace the void, where the seeker is purified and reborn in the vastness of their own inner universe. In the Kabbalistic tree of life, the abyss occupies a pivotal and profound position, acting as the metaphysical divide that separates the first three Sephirot, collectively known as the supernals, from the lower Sephirot. These supernals represent the highest, most abstract levels of divinity and universal principles. The abyss thus stands as a threshold between these realms of sublime understanding and the more accessible, experiential aspects of the tree that pertain to personal and spiritual development. In this mystical framework, the abyss is not represented by a conventional Sephirot. Instead, it is associated with the concept of Darth, a hidden Sephirot that signifies a void or hidden knowledge. Darth does not appear on the traditional tree of life, but is acknowledged by many Kabbalists and occultists as a significant region or aspect within the abyss. This hidden aspect of the abyss is linked symbolically to the 11th path on the tree of life, associated with the tarot card, the Fool. This association is deeply symbolic, embodying the concept of a leap of faith and the seemingly irrational courage required to embark on the perilous journey across the abyss. This journey demands the abandonment of preconceived notions and an embrace of the unknown, capturing the essence of divine folly, a willingness to confront the void without guarantees, driven by trust in the transformative power of the quest. Darth represents the fall of humanity from a unified consciousness into a duality between ego and divine nature. This division creates a barrier separating us from the three divine supernals. Darth emphasizes the profound challenge of the abyss in spiritual evolution, marking a crucial test where one must confront and integrate the dualities of existence to achieve transcendent unity. Corazon is existential self at the last gasp. Beyond Corazon, we are no longer ourself. The personality on the brink of the abyss will do anything, say anything, and find any excuse to avoid taking this disintegrating step into non-being. The abyss is guarded by the demon Corazon, who manifests during the third ceremonial method of crossing this gulf. He represents those parts of one's consciousness and unconsciousness that are unwilling or unable to enter the divine. Crowley described Corazon as the demon of dispersion and as a major obstacle to the spiritual aspirant on the path to enlightenment. Corazon is said to be the last great obstacle between the adept and the realization of his or her true will. Corazon's primary attribute is dispersion, and it personifies the chaos and formlessness that precede creation or follow destruction. Corazon's role is to scatter one's sense of self, challenging the adept to maintain integrity and purpose amidst the dissolution of egoic structures. Crowley's own encounter with Corazon occurred during a ritual in the Algerian desert, specifically in the Bou Sada oasis. Here, he and his companion, Victor Newberg, performed a series of magical workings where Crowley identified Newberg as the vessel for Corazon and himself as the exorcist. The encounter was described as harrowing, involving psychological and metaphysical trials. Psychologically, Corazon can be seen as symbolizing the internal demons and mental barriers that prevent individuals from achieving their full potential. It represents the deepest fears, uncertainties, and self-doubt. The battle with Corazon, in a spiritual or psychological context, is about overcoming one's own limitations and internal chaos. Success in this struggle is often seen as essential for personal growth and the development of a unified will. Embarking on the journey to cross the abyss is a venture that demands exceptional courage, resilience, and a deep yearning for spiritual transcendence.
Transcendence.
The scene, a typical courtroom. A jury of 12 looks on. The defendant accused of a terrible crime. 13.8 billion years ago, the universe began. In one moment there was nothing, and the next, everything. Just how this is possible is perhaps the biggest question in all of science, crossing the boundaries between theory and experiment, physics and philosophy. Everything we know about our universe hinges on mechanism, process, and causality. We strive to understand the reasons things are the way they are. And yet, at the most fundamental level, we do not know how or why the entire universe came to be. But this lack of explanation is not for want of searching. Perhaps, as famed cosmologist Stephen Hawking once supposed, there really was nothing before, considering space and time as inherent conjoined properties of the universe we inhabit. The beginning of that universe marked the beginning of time. Before time, there could be no space and therefore no universe. Considering the geometry of space-time back through the ages, he saw it contract, curve around, and eventually round off. Searching for something beyond that would be as meaningless as searching for something that was north of the North Pole. Or perhaps there was no actual beginning, but rather a limit to our powers of observation. Scientists believe that it was a split-second period of exponential expansion, known as inflation, that put the bang in the Big Bang, and which set the stage for everything that was to follow. Our inflation stopped after a tiny fraction of a second, but some physicists have argued that this is not the only period of inflation in the cosmos as a whole. Rather, inflation would continue elsewhere, eternally, producing bubble universes distributed through a potent, everlasting multiverse. Or perhaps our current universe is merely the latest in a long and potentially infinite series of expanding and contracting cosmos, a theory known as the Big Bounce. In this, instead of starting from nothing and inflating exponentially to produce the structure we see today, contemporary physicists like Paul Steinhardt suggest a cyclical growth and contraction of everything within the universe. Or perhaps our understanding of scale is fundamentally incomplete. Physicist Roger Penrose considered the properties of shapes regardless of their size, and believes we can do the same with the cosmos. In this idea, the universe loses a sense of time and scale at the infinitely small and the infinitely big, and becomes, to all intents and purposes, equivalent. The game of chess played the same whether on a board that fits in your pocket or spans an entire courtyard. Or perhaps our cosmos came about as a transient collision of dimensions. String theory attempts to explain the fundamentals of reality as tiny vibrating strings within an 11-dimensional reality of hyperspace. The 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time that we experience within our cosmos are merely a single brain in the overall bulk, with the beginning and growth of our universe coming about as higher-order brains collide. Or perhaps there is something else, some corner of mathematics or physics that we have yet to shine a light into and which, for the time being, eludes our understanding. For now, our universe's origin story remains a mystery, a multiple choice, choose your own adventure. Nevertheless, 13.8 billion years ago, the universe did begin. And this is the story of what happened next. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. This is Proxima Centauri. Even if we traveled more than 50,000 kilometers an hour, it would still take us more than 80,000 years to arrive there, and it is our closest star. It's estimated there are 100,000 million more distant stars in the Milky Way. and so sometimes it can be overwhelming to square our own lives with the vastness of everything else. And to work these things through, it's nice to have some help. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, and it's 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 30,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. You can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether it's via text, chat, or video call. You can also message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. And if your therapist isn't the right fit for any reason, you can switch to a new one at no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you, with more scheduling, flexibility, and at a more affordable price. So get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/HOTU, and I've also linked them below in the description. Thanks to BetterHelp for supporting educational content on YouTube. Where is the hottest place in the universe? You might expect to find it in the natural fusion reactor at the center of a star, but even as you insinuate in the plunge through its fiery depths, your journey would be in vain. Temperatures at the core reach a mere 15 million degrees Celsius. You may look to even more violent phenomena in the cosmos, like explosive supernovae. Here, during the dramatic death of a star, superheated shells of gas are ejected many light years in every direction, leaving a gravitationally compactified neutron star at their center. Temperatures here far exceed normal stellar furnaces, reaching 100 billion degrees Celsius. But this still isn't the hottest temperature to be found. In fact, the highest temperature that is ever...
Coast Guard's finest. Got one on board now, and we've been chatting the whole way. Navy SEAL during the 60s. Full of stories. I bet. Don't believe everything he says. I used to be married to a SEAL, you know. Oh yeah, forgot about that. Oh, by the way, we're pretty sure we saw an chronoplane in a Chicken Pass. Sure you did. No, really. Looks like a huge jet skimming the surface in ground effect. And it appeared to be heading your way at a pretty fast clip. Looked like one of those new rich guy ground effect yachts to me. But the SEAL thinks it's the Caspian Sea monster. Oh, okay. Well, be on the lookout for it. True story, he got a ride in once. So he should know. Talk to you in the morning. Sleep well out there. Peace out. 6WC out.
You know what? I'm not liking that one. There was another one, which was explaining it from the beginning.
The following is a conversation with Roger Penrose, physicist, mathematician, and philosopher at University of Oxford. He has made fundamental contributions in many disciplines, from the mathematical physics of general relativity and cosmology to the limitations of a computational view of consciousness. In his book, The Emperor's New Mind, Roger writes that, quote, "Children are not afraid to pose basic questions that may embarrass us as adults to ask." In many ways, my goal with this podcast is to embrace the inner child that is not constrained by how one should behave, speak, and think in the adult world. Roger is one of the most important minds of our time, so it's truly a pleasure and an honor to talk with him. This conversation was recorded before the outbreak of the pandemic. For everyone feeling the medical, psychological, and financial burden of the crisis, I'm sending love your way. Stay strong. We're in this together. We'll beat this thing. This is the Artificial Intelligence Podcast. If you enjoy it, subscribe on YouTube, review it with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, support it on Patreon, or simply connect with me on Twitter at Lex Friedman, spelled Fridman. As usual, I'll do a few minutes of ads now, and never any ads in the middle that can break the flow of the conversation. I hope that works for you and doesn't hurt the listening experience. Quick summary of the ads. 2 sponsors, ExpressVPN and Cash App. Please consider supporting the podcast by getting ExpressVPN at expressvpn.com/LexPod and downloading Cash App and using code LEXPODCAST. This show is presented by Cash App, the #1 finance app in the App Store. When you get it, use code LEXPODCAST. Cash App lets you send money to friends, buy Bitcoin, and invest in the stock market with as little as $1. Since Cash App does fractional share trading, let me mention that the order execution algorithm that works behind the scenes to create the abstraction of the fractional orders is an algorithmic marvel. So big props to the Cash App engineers for solving a hard problem that in the end provides an easy interface that takes a step up to the next layer of abstraction over the stock market, making trading more accessible for new investors and diversification much easier. So again, if you get Cash App from the App Store or Google Play and use the code LEXPODCAST, you get $10. Cash App will also education again to get it, and your number of website work. Get it at Podcast.
Okay.
You mentioned in conversation with Eric Weinstein on the Portal podcast that 2001 Space Odyssey is your favorite movie. Which aspect, if you could mention, of its representation of artificial intelligence, science, engineering connected with you?
There are all sorts of scenes there which are so amazing. And how science was so well done. I mean, people say, oh no, Interstellar is this amazing movie, which is the most scientific movie, but I thought it's another patch on 2001. I mean, 2001, they really went into all sorts of details regarding, getting the free fall well done and everything. I thought it was extremely well done.
So just the details were mesmerizing.
And also things like the scene where at the beginning they have these sort of human ancestors, which are sort of
right.
Or sort of apes becoming
the monolith.
Yes, and well, it's the one where he throws the bone up into the air, and then it becomes this. I mean, that's an amazing sequence there.
What do you make of the monolith? Does it have any scientific or philosophical meaning to you? This kind of thing that sparks innovation?
Not really. That comes from Arthur C. Clarke. I was always a great fan of Arthur C. Clarke.
So it's just a nice plot device.
Yeah, that plot was excellent. Yes. Yeah.
So HAL 9000 decides to get rid of the astronauts because she believes that they will interfere with the mission.
That's right. Yeah, well, there you are. It's this view. I don't know whether I disagree with it, because in a certain sense it was telling you it's wrong. See, the machine seemed to think it was superior to the human, and so it was entitled to get rid of the human beings and run the show itself.
Well, do you think HAL did the right thing? Do you think HAL is flawed, evil, or if we think about systems like HAL, would we want HAL to do the same thing in the future? What was the flaw there?
Well, you're basically touching on questions, you see. Is one supposed to believe that HAL was actually conscious? I mean, it was played rather that way, as though HAL was a conscious being.
Because HAL showed some pain, some cognizant. HAL appeared to be cognizant of what it means to die.
Yes.
And therefore had an inkling of consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure that aspect of it was made completely clear, whether HAL was really just a very sophisticated computer, which really didn't actually have these feelings and somehow. But you're right, it didn't like the idea of being turned off.
How does it change things if HAL was or wasn't conscious?
Well, it might say that it would be wrong to turn it off if it was actually conscious. I mean, these questions arise if you think... I mean, AI, one of the ideas, it's sort of a mixture in a sense. You say, if it's trying to do everything a human can do, and if you take the view that consciousness is something which would come along when the computer is sufficiently complicated, sufficiently whatever criterion you use to characterize its consciousness in terms of some computational criterion.
So how does consciousness change our evaluation of the decision that Hal made?
Well, I guess I was trying to say that people are a bit confused about this. Because if they say these machines will all become conscious, just simply because it's the degree of computation, and when you get beyond that certain degree of computation, it will become conscious, then of course you have all these problems. I mean, you might say, well, one of the reasons you're doing AI is because you want to send a device out to some distant planet, and you don't want to send a human out there because then you'd have to bring it back again, and that costs you far more than just sending it there and leaving it there. But if this device is actually a conscious entity, then you have to face up to the fact that that's immoral. And so the mere fact that you're making some AI device and getting on, thinking that removes your responsibility to it would be incorrect. And so this is some flaw in that kind of viewpoint. I'm not sure how, people who take it very seriously. I had this curious conversation with I'm going to forget names, I'm afraid, because this is what happens to me right at the wrong moment. Douglas Hofstadter.
Yeah.
And he'd written this book,
Gödel,
which I liked. I thought it was a fantastic book. But I didn't agree with his conclusion from Gödel's theorem. I think he got it wrong, you see. Well, I'll just tell you my story, you see, because I'd never met him. And then I knew I was going to meet him. The occasion I realized he was coming in, he wanted to talk to me, and I said, that's fine. And I just thought in my mind, well, I'm going to paint him into a corner, you see. So I'll use his arguments to convince him that certain numbers are conscious. Some integers, large enough integers, are actually conscious. And this was going to be my reductio ad absurdum. So I started having this argument, and he simply leapt into the corner. He didn't even need to be painted into it. He took the view that certain numbers were conscious. I thought that was a reductio ad absurdum, but he seemed to think it was a perfectly reasonable point of view.
Without the absurdum there.
Yes.
Interesting, but the thing you mentioned about Hal is the intuition that a lot of the people, at least in the artificial intelligence world, had and have, I think. They don't make it explicit, but that if you increase the power of computation, naturally consciousness will emerge.
Yes, I think that's what they think. But basically that's because they can't think of anything else.
Well, that's right.
And so it's a reasonable thing. I mean, you think, what does the brain do? Well, it does do a lot of computation. I think most of what you actually call computation is done by the cerebellum. I mean, this is one of the things that people don't much mention. I mean, I come to this subject from the outside, and certain things strike me, which you hardly ever hear mentioned. I mean, you hear mentioned about the left-right business. When you move your right arm, that's the left side of the brain, and so on, and all that sort of stuff. And it's more than that. If you have these plots of different parts of the brain, there are two of these things called the homunculi, which you see these pictures of a distorted human figure, and showing different parts of the brain controlling different parts of the body. And it's not simply things like, okay, the right hand is controlled and both sensory and motor on the left side, left hand on the right side. It's more than that. Vision is at the back, basically. Your feet at the top. And it's as though it's about the worst organization you can imagine.
Right, yeah.
So it can't just be a mistake in nature. There's something going on there. And this is made more pronounced when you think of the cerebellum. The cerebellum has, when I was first thinking about these things, I was told that it had half as many neurons or something like that, comparable. But now they tell me it's got far more neurons in the cerebrum. The cerebrum is this sort of convoluted thing at the top people always talk about. Cerebellum is this thing just looks a bit like a ball of wool right at the back underneath.
Yeah.
It's got more neurons. It's got more connections. Computationally, it's got much more going on than the cerebrum. But as far as we know, although it's slightly controversial, the cerebellum is entirely unconscious. So the actions, you have a pianist who plays an incredible piece of music, and you think of, he moves this little finger into this little key to get it hit at just the right moment. Does he or she consciously will that movement? No. Okay, the consciousness is coming in. It's probably to do with the feeling of the piece of music that's being performed and that sort of thing, which is going on. But the details of what's going on are controlled, I would think, almost entirely by the cerebellum. That's where you have this precision and the really detailed. Once you get, I mean, you think of a tennis player or something. Does that tennis player think exactly how to, which muscle should be moved in what direction and so on? No, of course not. But he or she will maybe think, well, if the ball is angled in such a way in that corner, that will be tricky for the opponent. And the details of that are all done largely with the cerebellum. That's where all the precise motions, but it's unconscious.
So why is it interesting to you that so much computation is done in the cerebellum and yet it is unconscious?
Because it doesn't. It's the view that somehow it's computation which is producing the consciousness. And here you have an incredible amount of computation going on, and as far as we know, it's completely unconscious. So what's the difference? And I think it's an important thing. What's the difference? Why is the cerebrum, but all this very peculiar stuff that's very hard to see on a computational perspective, like having everything have to cross over onto the other side and do something which looks completely inefficient. And you've got funny things like the frontal lobe and whatever you call the lobes, and the place where they come together. You have the different parts, the control, you see one to do with motor and the other to do with sensory. And they're sort of opposite each other rather than being connected by it's not as though you've got electrical circuits. There's something else going on there. So it's just the idea that it's like a complicated computer just seems to me to be completely missing the point. There must be a lot of computation going on, but the cerebellum seems to be much better at doing that than the cerebrum is.
So for sure, I think what explains it is like half hope and half we don't know what's going on, and therefore, from the computer science perspective, you hope that a Turing machine can achieve general intelligence.
Well, you have this wonderful thing about Turing and Gödel and Church and Curry and various people, particularly Turing, and I guess Post was the other one. These people who developed the idea of what a computation is. And there were different ideas of what a computation developed differently. I mean, Church's way of doing it was very different from Turing's. But then they were shown to be equivalent. And so the view emerged that what we mean by a computation is a very clear concept. And one of the wonderful things that Turing did was to show that you could have what we call a universal Turing machine. You just have to have a certain finite device. Okay, it has to have an unlimited storage space, which is accessible to it, but the actual computation, if you like, is performed by this one universal device. And so the view comes away, well, you have this universal Turing machine, and maybe the brain is something like that, a universal Turing machine, and it's got maybe not unlimited storage, but a huge storage accessible to it. And this model is one which is what's used in ordinary computation. It's a very powerful model. And the universalness of computation is very useful. You can have some problem and you may not see immediately how to put it onto a computer, but if it is something of that nature, then there are all sorts of sub-programs and subroutines and all the... I mean, I learned a little bit of computing when I was a student, but not very much. But it was enough to get the general ideas.
And there's something really pleasant about a formal system like that,
yeah,
where you can start discussing about what's provable, what's not, these kinds of things.
And you've got a notion which is an absolute notion, it's a notion of computability. And you can address when things are, what mathematical problems are computably solvable and what aren't.
So,
And it's a very beautiful area of mathematics, and it's a very powerful area of mathematics, and it underlies the whole sort of, the principles of computing machines that we have today.
could you say what is Gödel's incompleteness theorem, and how does it, maybe also say, is it heartbreaking to you, and how does it interfere with this notion of computation and
Well, you see, yeah.
consciousness?
Sure. Well, the ideas, basically, ideas which I formulated in my first year as a graduate student in Cambridge. I did my undergraduate work in mathematics in London, and I had a colleague, Ian Percival. We used to discuss things like computational and logical systems quite a lot. I'd heard about Gödel's theorem. I was a bit worried by the idea that it seemed to say there were things in mathematics that you could never prove. And so when I went to Cambridge as a graduate student, I went to various courses. You see, I was doing pure mathematics. I was doing algebraic geometry of a sort, a little bit different from all my supervisor and people, but it was algebraic geometry.
Yeah.
And I was interested, I got particularly interested in 3 lecture courses that were nothing to do with what I was supposed to be doing. One was a course by Hermann Bondi on Einstein's general theory of relativity, which was a beautiful course. He was an amazing lecturer, brought these things alive, absolutely. Another was a course on quantum mechanics, given by the great physicist Paul Dirac. Very beautiful course in a completely different way. It was very kind of organized and never got excited about anything, seemingly. And but it was extremely well put together, and I found that amazing too. Third course that was nothing to do with what I should be doing was a course on mathematical logic. I got, as I say, my discussions with Ian Percival.
Was the incompleteness theorem already deeply within mathematical logic space? Were you introduced
I was
to it?
introduced to it in detail by the course by Steen. And it was 2 things he described which were very fundamental to my understanding. One was Turing machines and the whole idea of computability and all that. So that was all very much part of the course. The other one was the Gödel theorem. And it wasn't what I was afraid it was, to tell you there were things in mathematics you couldn't prove. It was basically, and he phrased it in a way which often people didn't. And if you read Douglas Hofstadter's book, he doesn't, you see. But Steen made it very clear, and also in a sort of public lecture that he gave to a mathematical, I think maybe the Adams Society, one of the mathematical undergraduate societies, and he made this point again very clearly. But if you've got a formal system of proof, so suppose what you mean by proof is something which you could check with a computer. So to say whether you've got it right or not, you've got a lot of steps. Have you carried this computational procedure, well, following the proof, steps of the proof correctly? That can be checked by an algorithm, by a computer. So that's the key thing. Now what you have to, now you see, is this any good? If you've got an algorithmic system which claims to say, yes, this is right, this you've proved it correctly, this is true. If you've proved it, if you made a mistake, it doesn't say it's true or false, but if you've done it right, then the conclusion you've come to is correct. Now you say, why do you believe it's correct? Because you've looked at the rules and you said, well, okay, that one's all right, yeah, that one's all right, what about that? Oh, I'm not sure. Oh, yeah, I see why it's all right. Okay, you go through all the rules, you say, yes, following those rules, if it says, yes, it's true, it is true. You've got to make sure that these rules are ones that you trust. If you follow the rules and it says it's a proof, is the result actually true? And that your belief that it's true depends upon looking at the rules and understanding them. Now what Gödel shows, that if you have such a system, then you can construct a statement of the very kind that it's supposed to look at, a mathematical statement, and you can see by the way it's constructed and what it means that it's true but not provable by the rules that you've been given. It depends on your trust in the rules. Do you believe that the rules only give you truths? If you believe the rules only give you truths, then you believe this other statement is also true. I found this absolutely mind-blowing. When I saw this, it blew my mind. I thought, my God, you can see that this statement is true. It's as good as any proof, because it only depends on your belief in the reliability of the proof procedure. That's all it is. And understanding that the coding is done correctly. And it enables you to transcend that system. So whatever system you have, as long as you can understand what it's doing and why you believe it only gives you truths, then you can see beyond that system. Now, how do you see beyond it? What is it that enables you to transcend that system? Well, it's your understanding of what the system is actually saying and what the statement that you've constructed is actually saying. So it's this quality of understanding, whatever it is, which is not governed by rules. It's not a computational procedure.
So this idea of understanding is not going to be within the rules of within the formal system.
Yes, you're only using those
humans.
rules anyway,
Yeah.
because you have understood them to be rules which only give you truths. There'd be no point in it otherwise. I mean, people say, well, okay, this is one set of rules as good as any other. Well, it's not true. So you have to understand what the rules mean. And why does that understanding of the mean give you something beyond the rules themselves? And that's what it was. That's what blew my mind. It's somehow understanding why the rules give you truths enables you to transcend the rules.
So that's where, I mean, even at that time, that's already where the thought entered your mind that the idea of understanding, or we can start calling it things like intelligence or even consciousness, is outside the rules.
Yes. See, I've always concentrated on understanding. You know, people come and point out things. Well, we know, what about creativity? That's something a machine can't do. Is create. Well, I don't know. What is creativity? And I don't know. And, you know, somebody can put some funny things on a piece of paper and say that's creative, and you could make a machine do that. Is it really creative? I don't know. You see, I worry about that one. I sort of agree with it in a sense. But it's so hard to do anything with that statement. But understanding, yes, you can. You can go see that understanding whatever it is, and it's very hard to put your finger on it. That's absolutely true.
Can you try to define or maybe dance around a definition of understanding?
To some degree, but I often wondered about this. But there is something there which is very slippery. It's something like standing back. And it's got to be something, you see, it's also got to be something which was of value to our remote ancestors.
Right.
Because sometimes there's a cartoon which I drew sometimes showing you how all these, in the foreground you see this mathematician just doing some mathematical theorem. There's a little bit of a joke in that theorem, but let's not go into that. He's trying to prove some theorem, and he's about to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger who's hiding in the undergrowth, you see. And in the distance, you see his cousins building, growing crops, building shelters, domesticating animals. And in the slight foreground, you see they built a mammoth trap, and this poor old mammoth is falling into a pit, you see, and all these people around him are about to grab him, you see. And well, you see, those are the ones who, the quality of understanding, which goes with it's not just the mathematician doing his mathematics. This understanding quality is something else, which has been of tremendous advantage to us, not just to us. See, I don't think consciousness is limited to humans.
Yeah, that's the interesting question. At which point, if it is indeed connected to the evolutionary process, at which point did we pick up this
a very
ability?
Hard question. It's certainly, I don't think it's primates. You know, you see these pictures of African hunting dogs and how they can plan amongst themselves how to catch the antelopes. Some of these David Attenborough films, I think this probably was one of them. And you could see the hunting dogs, and they divide themselves into two groups, and they go in two different routes. One of them goes and they sort of hide next to the river. And the other group goes around and they start yelping at these. They don't bark, I guess, whatever noise hunting dogs do, the antelopes, and they sort of round them up and they chase them in the direction of the river. And there are the other ones just waiting for them, just to get because when they get to the river, it slows them down. And so they pounce on them. So they've obviously planned this all out somehow. I have no idea how. And there is some element of conscious planning as far as I can see. I don't think it's just some kind of... so much of AI these days is done on what they call bottom-up systems, is it? Yeah. Right. Where you have neural networks and you give them a zillion different things to look at and then they sort of can choose one thing over another just because it's seen so many examples and picks up on little signals which one may not even be conscious of.
And that doesn't feel like understanding.
There's no understanding in that whatsoever. So,
well, you're being a little bit human-centric, so...
Well,
I think I would expect...
I'm not with the dogs, am I?
No, you're not. Sorry, not human-centric, but I misspoke. Biology-centric. Is it possible that consciousness would just look slightly different?
Well, I'm not saying it's biological, because we don't know.
Right.
I think other examples of the elephants is a wonderful example, too. Where this was about Attenborough 1. Where the elephants have to go from the troop of them have to go long distances. And the leader of a troop is a female, they all are apparently. And this female, she had to go all the way from one part of the country to another. And at a certain point, she made a detour. And they went off in this big detour. All the troop came with her. And this was where her sister had died. And there were her bones lying around, and they go and pick up the bones, and they hand it around, and they caress the bones, and then they put them back, and they will go back again. What the hell are they doing?
That's so interesting.
I mean, there's something going on. There's no clear connection with natural selection. There's just some deep feeling going on there, which has to do with their conscious experience. And I think it's something which overall is advantageous by natural selection, but not directly to do with natural selection.
I like that. There's something going on there.
Yeah.
Like I told you, I'm Russian, so I tend to romanticize all things of this nature. that it's not merely cold, hard computation.
Perhaps I could just slightly answer your question. You were asking me, what is it? There's something about sort of standing back and thinking about your own thought processes. I mean, there is something like that in the Gödel thing, because you're not following the rules. You're standing back and thinking about the rules. And so there is something that you might say, you think about you're doing something, and you think, what the hell am I doing? And you sort of stand back and think about what it is that's making you think in such a way.
Just take a step back outside the game you've been playing.
Yeah, you back up and you think about, you're just not playing the game anymore. You're thinking about what the hell you're doing in playing this game.
And that's somehow, it's not a very precise descriptor, but somehow feels very true that's somehow understanding. So
yeah.
This kind of reflection.
The reflection, yes. Yeah. There is some, it's a bit hard to put your finger on, but there is something there which I think maybe could be unearthed at some point and see this is really what's going on. Why conscious beings have this advantage. What it is that gives them an advantage. And I think it goes way back. I don't think we're talking about the hunting dogs and the elephants. It's pretty clear that octopuses have the same sort of quality. I mean, you call it consciousness? Yeah, I think so. I've seen enough examples of the way that they behave, and the evolution route is completely different. Does it go way back to some common ancestor, or did it come separately?
My hope is it's something simple, but the hard question, if there's a hardware prerequisite, we have to develop some kind of hardware mechanisms in our computers. Like basically, as you suggest, we'll get to in a second, we kind of have to throw away the computer as we know it today. Yeah. The deterministic machines we know today to try to create it. I mean, my hope, of course, is not, but...
Well, I should go really back to the story, which, in a sense, I haven't finished. Because I went to these 3 courses, you see, when I was a graduate student. And so I started to think, well, I'm a pretty, what you might call a materialist in the sense of thinking that there's no kind of mystical or something or other which comes in from who knows where.
You still that? Are you still throughout your life been a
I don't like the word materialist because it suggests we know what material is. And that
Well put.
is a bad word.
But
Because
there's no mystical.
it's not some mystical something which is not not treatable by science.
That's so beautifully put, just to pause on that for a second. You're a materialist, but you acknowledge that we don't really know what the material is.
That's right. I mean, I like to call myself a scientist, I suppose, but it means that, yes, but you see, the question goes on here. So I began thinking, okay, if consciousness or understanding is something which is not a computational process, what can it be? And I knew enough from my undergraduate work. I knew about Newtonian mechanics, and I knew how basically you could put it on a computer. There is a fundamental issue, which is it important or not, that computation depends upon discrete things, so you're using discrete elements, whereas the physical laws depend on the continuum. Now, is this something to do with it? Is it the fact that we use the continuum in our physics, and if we model our physical system, we use discrete systems like ordinary computers? I came to the view that that's probably not it. I might have to retract on that someday, but the view was no, you can get close enough. It's not altogether clear, I have to say, but you can get close enough. And, I went to this course by Bondi on general relativity, and I thought, well, you can put that on a computer. Of course, that was a long time before people, and I've sort of grown up with this, how people have done better and better calculations, and they could work out about black holes, and they can then work out how black holes can interact with each other, spiral around, and what kind of gravitational waves come out. And it's a very impressive piece of computational work, how you can actually work out the shapes of those signals. Now we have LIGO seeing these signals, and you say, yeah, those black holes spiral into each other. This is just a vindication of the power of computation in describing Einstein's general relativity.
So in that case, we can get close, but so with computation, we can get close to our understanding of the physics.
You can get very, very close. Now, is that close enough, you see? And then I went to this course by Dirac. Now, you see, I think it was the very first lecture that he gave, and he was talking about the superposition principle. And he said, if you have a particle, you usually think of particle can be over here or over there, but in quantum mechanics, it can be over here and over there at the same time. And you have these states which involve a superposition, in some sense, of different locations for that particle. And then he got out his piece of chalk. Some people say he broke it in two as a kind of illustration of how the piece of chalk might be over here and over there at the same time. And he was talking about this, and my mind wandered. I don't remember what he said. All I can remember, he's just moved on to the next topic, and something about energy he'd mentioned, which I had no idea what it had to do with anything. And so I'd been struck with this and worried about it ever since. It's probably just as well I didn't hear his explanation, because it was probably one of these things to calm me down and not worry about it anymore. Whereas in my case, I've worried about it ever since. So I thought, maybe that's the catch. There is something in quantum mechanics where these superpositions become one or the other, and that's not part of quantum mechanics. There's something missing in the theory. The theory is incomplete. It's not just incomplete, it's in a certain sense not quite right. Because if you follow the equation, the basic equation of quantum mechanics, that's the Schrödinger equation, you could put that on a computer too. There are lots of difficulties about how many parameters you have to put in and so on. That can be very tricky, but nevertheless, it is a computational process. Modulo this question about the continuum as before, but it's not clear that makes any difference.
So our theories of quantum mechanics may be missing the same element that the universal Turing machine is missing about consciousness.
Yes. Yeah, this is the view I held, is that you need a theory, and that what people call the reduction of the state or the collapse of the wave function, which you have to have, otherwise quantum mechanics doesn't relate to the world we see. To make it relate to the world we see, you've got to break the Schrödinger equation. Schrödinger himself was absolutely appalled by this idea, his own equation. I mean, that's why he introduced this famous Schrodinger's cat as a thought experiment. He's really saying, look, this is where my equation leads you into it. There's something wrong, something we haven't understood, which is basically fundamental. And so I was trying to put all these things together and said, well, it's got to be the non-computability comes in there. And I also can't quite remember when I thought this, but it's when gravity is involved in quantum mechanics. It's the combination of those two, and it's that point when you have good reasons to believe, this came much later, but I have good reason to believe that the principles of general relativity and those of quantum mechanics, most particularly, it's the basic principle of equivalence, which goes back to Galileo. If you fall freely, you eliminate the gravitational field. So you imagine Galileo dropping his big rock and his little rock from the Leaning Tower. Whether he actually ever did that or not is pretty irrelevant. And as the rocks fall to the ground, you have a little insect sitting on one of them looking at the other one. And it seems to think, oh, there's no gravity here. Of course, it hits the ground and then you realize something different's going on. But when it's in free fall, the gravity has been eliminated. Galileo understood that very beautifully. He gives these wonderful examples of fireworks. And you see the fireworks and explode, and you see the sphere of sparkling fireworks. It remains a sphere as it falls down, as though there were no gravity. So he understood that principle, but he couldn't make a theory out of it. Einstein came along, used exactly the same principle, and that's the basis of Einstein's general theory of relativity. Now, there is a conflict. This is something I did much, much later, so this wasn't those days. Much, much later. You can see there is a basic conflict between the principle of superposition, the thing that Dirac was talking about, and the principle of general covariance. Well, principle of equivalence. Gravitational field is equivalent to an acceleration.
Can you pause for a second? What is the principle of equivalence?
It's this Galileo principle that you can eliminate, at least locally. You have to be in a small neighborhood, because if you have people dropping rocks all around the world somewhere, you can't get rid of it all at once. But in the local neighborhood, you can eliminate the gravitational field by falling freely with it. And we now see that with astronauts, and they don't, the Earth is right there. You can see the great globe of the Earth right beneath them. But they don't care about it. As far as they're concerned, there's no gravity. They fall freely in the gravitational field, and that gets rid of the gravitational field. And that's the principle of equivalence.
So what's the contradiction? What's the tension with superposition and the
that's
equivalence?
technical.
Well, but so just to backtrack for a second, just to see if we can weave a thread through it all.
Yes.
So we started to think about consciousness as potentially needing some of the same, not mystical, but some of the same magic.
You see, it is a complicated story. So people think, oh, I'm drifting away from the point or something. But I think it is a complicated story. So what I'm trying to say, and I try to put it in a nutshell, it's not so easy. I'm trying to say that whatever consciousness is, it's not a computation.
Yes.
Or it's not a physical process which can be described by computation.
But it nevertheless could be. So one of the interesting models that you've proposed is the orchestrated objective reduction.
Yes, well, you see, that's going from there, you see. So I say I have no idea. So I wrote this book. Through my scientific career, I thought, when I'm retired, I'll have enough time to write a sort of a popularish book, which I will explain my ideas and puzzles. What I like, beautiful things about physics and mathematics, and this puzzle about computability and consciousness and so on. And in the process of writing this book, well, I thought I'd do it when I was retired. I didn't actually. I didn't wait that long, because there was a radio discussion between Edward Fredkin and Marvin Minsky. And they were talking about what computers could do, and they were entering a big room. They imagined entering this big room. At the other end of the room, two computers were talking to each other. And as you walk up to the computers, they will have communicated to each other more ideas, concepts, things than the entire human race had ever done.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I know where you're coming from, but I just don't believe you. There's something missing. So I thought, well, I should write my book. And so I did. It was at roughly the same time Stephen Hawking was writing his Brief History of Time. And
in the 80s at some point. The book you're talking about is The Emperor's New Mind.
Emperor's New Mind, that's right.
And both are incredible books, The Brief History of Time and Emperor's New Mind.
Yes, it was quite interesting because he told me he'd got Carl Sagan, I think, to write a foreword.
It's a good get.
To the book, you see. So I thought, gosh, what am I going to do? I'm not going to get anywhere unless I get somebody. So I said, oh, I know Martin Gardner, so I wonder if he'd do it. So he did, and he did a very nice foreword.
So that's an incredible book, and some of this is the same people you mentioned, Ed Franken, which I guess of Expert Systems fame, and Minsky, of course, people know in the AI world, but they represent the artificial intelligence
Absolutely,
world.
that's right.
That do hope and dream that AI's intelligence is.
That's right. Well, you see, it was my thinking. Well, I see where they're coming from, and from that perspective, yeah, you're right, but that's not my perspective. So I thought I had to say it. And as I was writing my book, you see, I thought, well, I don't really know anything about neurophysiology. What am I doing writing this book? So I started reading up about neurophysiology. And I read up, and I was trying to find out how it is that nerve signals could possibly preserve quantum coherence. And all I read is that the electrical signals which go along the nerves create effects through the brain. There's no chance you can isolate it. So I thought, this is hopeless. So I come to the end of the book, and I more or less give up. I just think of something which I didn't believe in. Maybe this is a way around it, but no. And then you see, I thought, well, maybe this book will at least stimulate young people to do science or something. And I got all these letters from old retired people instead. These are the only people who had time to read my book.
So, I mean,
except for Stuart Hameroff.
Except for Stuart Hameroff.
Stuart Hameroff wrote to me and he said, I think you're missing something. You don't know about microtubules, do you? He didn't put it quite like that, but that was more or less it. And he said, this is what you really need to consider. So I thought, my God, yes, that's a much more promising structure.
So, I mean, fundamentally, you were searching for the source of non-computable source of consciousness within the human brain, in the biology. And so, what are if I may ask, what are microtubules?
Well, you see, I was ignorant in what I'd read. I never came across them in the books I looked at. Perhaps I only read rather superficially, which is true. But I didn't know about microtubules. Stuart, I think one of the things that impressed him about them was when you see pictures of mitosis, that's a cell dividing, and you see all the chromosomes, and the chromosomes all get lined up, and then they get pulled apart. And so that as the cell divides, half the chromosomes go, they divide into the two parts, and they go two different ways. And what is it that's pulling them apart? Well, those are these little things called microtubules. And so he started to get interested in them, and he formed the view. Well, had his day job or night job or whatever you call it is to put people to sleep, except he doesn't like calling it sleep because it's different. General anesthetics in a reversible way. So you want to make sure that they don't experience the pain that would otherwise be something that they feel. And consciousness is turned off for a while, and it can be turned back on again. So it's crucial that you can turn it off and turn it on. And what do you do when you're doing that? What do general anesthetic gases do? And see, he formed the view that it's the microtubules that they affect. And the details of why he formed that view is not altogether clear to me, but there's an interesting story he keeps talking about. But I found this very exciting because I thought these structures, these little tubes which inhabit pretty well all cells, it's not just neurons, apart from red blood cells, they inhabit pretty well all the other cells in the body. But they're not all the same kind. You get different kinds of microtubules. And the ones that excited me the most, this may still not be totally clear, but the ones that excited me most were the only ones that I knew about at the time, because they're very, very symmetrical structures. And I had reason to believe that these very symmetrical structures would be much better at preserving a quantum state, quantum coherence, preserving the thing without... You just need to preserve certain degrees of freedom without them leaking into the environment. Once they leak into the environment, you're lost. So you've got to preserve these quantum states at a level which the state reduction process comes in, and that's where I think the non-computability comes in, and it's the measurement process in quantum mechanics, what's going on.
So something about the measurement process and what's going on, something about the structure of the microtubules.
Yes.
Your intuition says maybe there's something here. Maybe this kind of structure allows for the mystery of the...
There was a much
quantum
better
mechanics.
chance, yes. It just struck me that partly it was the symmetry, because there is a feature of symmetry. You can preserve quantum coherence much better with symmetrical structures. So there is a good reason for that. And that impressed me a lot. I didn't know the difference between the A lattice and B lattice at that time, which could be important. Now that could be, that's an issue which isn't talked about much.
But that's in some sense details. We've got to take a step back just to say,
Yeah.
in case people are not familiar.
Yeah.
So this was called the orchestrated objective reduction idea, or OR, which is a biological philosophy of mind that postulates that consciousness originates at the quantum level inside neurons. So that has to do with your search for where is it coming from. So that's counter to the notion that consciousness might arise from the computation performed by the synapses.
Yes,
So-
I think the key point... See, sometimes people say it's because it's quantum mechanical. It's not just that. See, it's more outrageous than that. You see, this is one reason I think we're so far off from it, because we don't even know the physics right. You see, it's not just quantum mechanics. People say, oh, you know, quantum systems and biological structures. No, well, you're starting to see that some basic biological systems does depend on quantum. I mean, look, in the first place, all of chemistry is quantum mechanics. People got used to that, so they don't count that. So he said, let's not count quantum chemistry. We sort of got the hang of that, I think. But you have quantum effects, which are not just chemical, in photosynthesis. And this is one of the striking things in the last several years, that photosynthesis seems to be a basically quantum process, which is not simply chemical. It's using quantum mechanics in a very basic way. So you could start saying, oh, well, with photosynthesis is based on quantum mechanics, why not behavior of neurons and things like that? Maybe there's something which is a bit like photosynthesis in that respect. But what I'm saying is even more outrageous than that, because those things are talking about conventional quantum mechanics. Now, my argument says that conventional quantum mechanics, if you're just following the Schrödinger equation, that's still computable. So you've got to go beyond that. So you've got to go to where quantum mechanics goes wrong in a certain sense. You have to be a little bit careful about that, because the way people do quantum mechanics is a sort of mixture of two different processes. One of them is the Schrödinger equation, which is an equation which Schrödinger wrote down, and it tells you how the state of a system evolves. And it evolves according to this equation, completely deterministic, but it evolves into ridiculous situations. And this was what Schrödinger was very much pointing out with his cat. He said, you follow my equation, that's Schrödinger's equation, and you could say that you have to, a cat which is dead and alive at the same time. That would be the evolution of the Schrödinger equation, would lead to a state which is the cat being dead and alive at the same time. And he's more or less saying this is an absurdity. People nowadays say, oh, well, Schrödinger said you can have a cat which is dead and alive. It's not that. You see, he was saying this is an absurdity. There's something missing. And that the reduction of the state or the collapse of the wave function or whatever it is something which has to be understood. It's not following the Schrödinger equation. It's not the way we conventionally do quantum mechanics. There's something more than that, And it's easy to quote authority here because Einstein, at least 3 of the greatest physicists of 20th century who were very fundamental in developing quantum mechanics. Einstein, one of them, Schrödinger, another, Dirac, another. You have to look carefully at Dirac's writing because he didn't tend to say this out loud very much because he was very cautious about what he said. You find the right place and you see he says quantum mechanics is a provisional theory. We need something which explains the collapse of the wave function. We need to go beyond the theory we have now. I happen to be one of the kinds of people, there's a whole group of people, they're all considered to be a bit mavericks, who believe that quantum mechanics needs to be modified. There's a small minority of those people, which are already a minority, who think that the way in which it's modified has to be with gravity. And there is an even smaller minority of those people who think it's the particular way that I think it is, you see. So
those are the quantum gravity folks. But what's
you see, quantum gravity is already not this. Because when you say quantum gravity, what you really mean is quantum mechanics applied to gravitational theory. So you say, let's take this wonderful formalism of quantum mechanics and make gravity fit into it. So that is what quantum gravity is meant to be. Now I'm saying you've got to be more even-handed, that gravity affects the structure of quantum mechanics too. It's not just you quantize gravity. You've got to gravitize quantum mechanics. And it's a two-way thing.
But then when do you even get started? So that you're saying that we have to figure out a totally new ideas in there.
Exactly. No, you're stuck. You don't have a theory. That's the trouble. So this is a big problem. If you say, okay, well, what's the theory? I don't know.
So we may be in the very early days, sort of.
It is in the very early days, isn't it? But I'm just making this point.
Yes.
Well, you see, Stuart Hameroff tends to be, Penrose says that it's got to be a reduction of the state, and so let's use it. The trouble is Penrose doesn't say that. Penrose says, well, I think that. But
Yeah, right.
we have no experiments as yet which show it's that.
Yes.
There are experiments which are being thought through and which I'm hoping will be performed. There is an experiment which is being developed by Dirk Bouwmeester, who I've known for a long time, who shares his time between Leiden in the Netherlands and Santa Barbara in the US. And he's been working on an experiment which could perhaps demonstrate that quantum mechanics as we now understand it, if you don't bring in the gravitational effects, has to be modified.
And then there's also experiments that are underway that kind of look at the microtubule side of things to see if there's, in the biology, you could see something like that. Could you briefly mention it? Because that's a really sort of one of the only experimental attempts in the very early days of even thinking about consciousness.
I think there's a very serious area here, which is what Stuart Hameroff is doing, and I think it's very important. One of the few places that you can really get a bit of a handle on what consciousness is what turns it off. And when you're thinking about general anesthetics, it's very specific. These things turn consciousness off. What the hell do they do? Right. Well, Stuart and a number of people who work with him and others happen to believe that the general anesthetics directly affect microtubules. And there is some evidence for this. I don't know how strong it is and how watertight the case is, but I think there is some evidence pointing in that kind of direction. It's not just an ordinary chemical process. There's something quite different about it. And one of the main candidates is that these anesthetic gases do affect directly microtubules. And how strong that evidence is, I wouldn't be in a position to say. But I think there is fairly impressive evidence.
And the point is the experiments are being undertaken, which is...
I mean, that is experimental. It's a very clear direction where you can think of experiments which could indicate whether or not it's really microtubules which the anesthetic gases directly affect.
That's really exciting. One of the sad things is, as far as from my outside perspective, is not many people are working on this. So there's a very... Like with Stuart, even it feels like there's very few people are carrying the flag forward on this.
I think it's not many in the sense it's a minority, but it's not zero anymore. You see, when Stuart and I were originally
It was
talked about
zero.
this, we were just us and few of our friends. There weren't many people taking it seriously, but it's grown into one of the main viewpoints. There might be about 4 or 5 or 6 different views which people hold, and it's one of them. So it's considered as one of the possible lines of thinking, yes.
You describe physics theories as falling into one of 3 categories: the superb, the useful, or the tentative. I like those words. It's a beautiful categorization. Do you think we will ever have a superb theory of intelligence and of consciousness?
We might. We're a long way from it. I don't think we're in the tentative scale. I mean, it's
You don't think we've even entered the realm of tentative?
probably no. I think it's
Yeah, that's
tentative.
right.
No, well, you see, it's so controversial. We don't have a clear view which is accepted by a majority. I mean, you say, people. Most views are computational in one form or another. I think but it's not very clear, because even the IIT people who think of them as computational, but I've heard them say no, consciousness is supposed to be not computational. I say, well, if it's not computational, what the hell is it? What's going on? What physical processes are going on which are that?
What does it mean for something to be computational then? So,
Well, there has to be a process which is... You see, it's very curious the way the history has developed in quantum mechanics, because very early on people thought there was something to do with consciousness, but it was almost the other way around. You see, you have to say the Schrödinger equation says all these different alternatives happen all at once, and then when is it that only one of them happens? Well, one of the views, which was quite commonly held by a few distinguished quantum physicists, is when a conscious being looks at the system or becomes aware of it, and at that point it becomes one or the other. That's a role where consciousness is somehow actively reducing the state. My view is almost the exact opposite of that. It's the state reduces itself in some way, some non-computational way which we don't understand, we don't have a proper theory of, and that is the building block of what consciousness is. So consciousness is the other way around. It depends on that choice which nature makes all the time, when the state becomes one or the other rather than the superposition of one and the other. And when that happens, there is what we're saying now, an element of proto-consciousness takes place. Proto-consciousness is, roughly speaking, the building block out of which actual consciousness is constructed. So you have these proto-conscious elements, which are when the state decides to do one thing or the other. And that's the thing which, when organized together, that's the OR part in OR. But the ORC part, that's the OR part, at least one can see where one's driving as a theory. You can say it's the quantum choice of going this way or that way. But the ORC part, which is the orchestration of this, is much more mysterious. And how does the brain somehow orchestrate all these individual OR processes into a genuine conscious experience?
and it might be something that's beautifully simple, but we're completely in the dark about.
Yeah, I think at the moment that's the thing. We happily put the word orc down there to say orchestrated, but that's even more unclear what that really means.
Just like the word material, orchestrated.
Yes.
Who knows?
Yes.
And we've been dancing a little bit between the word intelligence or understanding and consciousness. Do you kind of see those as sitting in the same space of mystery as we
Yes, well, you
discussed?
see, I tend to say you have understanding and intelligence and awareness. And somehow understanding is in the middle of it, you see. I like to say, could you say of an entity that is actually intelligent if it doesn't have the quality of understanding? Like, I'm using terms I don't even know how to define. But who cares? I'm just relating them.
They're somewhat poetic, so if I somehow understand them,
Yes. That's right, we don't, exactly.
But they're not mathematical in nature.
Yes, you see, as a mathematician, I don't know how to define any of them, but at least I can point to the connections. So the idea is intelligence is something which I believe needs understanding. Otherwise, you wouldn't say it's really intelligence. And understanding needs awareness. Otherwise, you wouldn't really say it's understanding. You say of an entity that understands something unless it's really aware of it in our normal usage. So there's a three sort of awareness, understanding, and intelligence. And I just tend to concentrate on understanding because that's where I can say something.
Yeah.
And that's the Gödel theorem and things like that. But what does it mean to perceive the color blue or something? I mean, I'm the foggiest. That's a much more difficult question. I mean, is it the same if I see a color blue and you see it? Or if you're somebody with this condition, what is it called?
Or where you assign like a sound to a color.
Yeah, that's right. You get colors and sounds mixed up, and that sort of thing. I mean, an interesting subject. I mean,
but from the physics perspective, from the fundamentals perspective, we don't.
I think we're way off having much understanding what's going on there.
In your 2010 book, Cycles of Time, you suggest that another universe may have existed before the Big Bang. Can you describe this idea? First of all, what is the Big Bang? Sounds like a funny word.
Yes.
And what may have been there before it?
Yes. Just as a matter of terminology, I don't like to call it another universe, because when you have another universe, you think of it kind of quite separate from us. But these things, they're not separate. Now, the Big Bang, conventional theory, you see, I was actually brought up in the sense of when I started getting interested in cosmology, there was a thing called the steady state model, which was sort of philosophically very interesting. And there wasn't a Big Bang in that theory, that somehow new material was created all the time in the form of hydrogen, and the universe kept on expanding, and there was room for more hydrogen. It was a rather philosophically nice picture. It was disproved when the Big Bang, well, when I say the Big Bang, this was theoretically discovered by people trying to solve Einstein's equations and apply it to cosmology. Einstein didn't like the idea. He liked a universe which was there all the time. And he had a model which was there all the time. But then there was this discovery, accidental discovery, a very important discovery, of this microwave background. And if there's the crackle on your television screen, which is already sensing this microwave background, which is coming at us from all directions. And you can trace it back and back and back and back. And it came from a very early stage of the universe. Well, it's part of the Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory was when people tried to solve Einstein's equations. They really found you had to have this initial state where the universe, it was used to be called the primordial atom and things like this. There's Friedman and Lemaitre. Friedman was a Russian, Lemaitre was a Belgian, and they independently, well, basically Friedman first, and Lemaitre talked about the initial state, which is a very, very concentrated initial state, which seemed to be the origin of the universe.
Primordial atom.
Primordial atom is what he called it, yes. And then it became, well, Fred Hoyle used the term Big Bang in a kind of derogatory sense. He said, well,
just like with Schrödinger and the cats, right?
Yes, it's like sort of got picked up on, whereas it wasn't his intention originally. But then the evidence piled up and piled up. And one of my friends, and I learned a lot from him when I was in Cambridge, was Dennis Sharma. He was a great proponent of steady state. And then he got converted. He said, no, I'm sorry. I had a great respect for him. He went around lecturing and said, I was wrong. The steady state model doesn't work. There was this Big Bang. And this microwave background that you see, okay, it's not actually quite the Big Bang. When I say not quite, it's about 380,000 years after the Big Bang. But that's what you see. But then you have to have had this Big Bang before it in order to make the equations work. And it works beautifully. Except for one little thing, which is this thing called inflation, which people had to put into it to make it work. When I first heard of it, I didn't like it at all.
What's inflation?
Inflation is that in the first, I'm going to give you a very tiny number. Think of a second. That's not very long. Now I'm going to give you a fraction of a second. 1 over a number. This number has 32 digits. Let's say between 36 and 32 digits. Tiny, tiny time. between those two tiny ridiculous seconds, fraction of a second, the universe was supposed to have expanded in this exponential way, an enormous way, for no apparent reason. You had to invent a particular thing called the inflaton field to make it do it. And I thought, this is completely crazy. There are reasons why people stuck with this idea. You see, the thing is that I formed my model for reasons which are very fundamental, if you like. It has to do with this very fundamental principle, which is known as the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics says, more or less, things get more and more random as time goes on. Now, another way of saying exactly the same thing is things get less and less random. As things go back, as you go back in time, they get less and less random. Then you go back and back and back and back, and the earliest thing you can directly see is this microwave background. What's one of the most striking features of it is that it's random. It has this, what you call this spectrum of, which is what's called the Planck spectrum, of frequencies, different intensities for different frequencies, and it's this wonderful curve due to Max Planck. And what's it telling you? It's telling you that the entropy is at a maximum. It started off at a maximum, and it's going up ever since. I call that the mammoth in the room. I mean, this is a paradox.
A mammoth, yeah, it is. It is.
And so people, why don't cosmologists worry about this? So I worried about it. And then I thought, well, it's not really a paradox, because you're looking at matter and radiation at a maximum entropy state. What you're not seeing directly in that is the gravitation. It's gravitation which is not thermalized. The gravitation was very, very low entropy. And it's low entropy by the uniformity. And you see that in the microwave too. It's very uniform over the whole sky. I'm compressing a long story into a very short few sentences.
And doing a great job, yeah.
So what I'm saying is that there's a huge puzzle. Why was gravity in this very low entropy state, very highly organized state, everything else was all random? And that, to me, was the biggest problem in cosmology. The biggest problem? Nobody seems to even worry about it. People say they solved all the problems and they don't even worry about it. They think inflation solves it. It doesn't. It can't. Because it's just...
Just to clarify, that was your problem with the inflation describing some aspect of
yes,
the moments right after the Big Bang?
Inflation is supposed to stretch it out and make it all uniform, you see. It doesn't do it because you can only do it if it's uniform already at the beginning. It's you just have to look at it. I can't go into the details, but it doesn't solve it. And it was completely clear to me it doesn't solve it.
But where does the conformal cyclic cosmology of starting to talk about something before
yes.
that singularity?
Well, I was just thinking to myself, how boring this universe is going to be. You've got this exponential expansion. This was discovered early in this century, 21st century. People discovered that these supernova exploding stars showed that the universe is actually undergoing this exponential expansion. So it's a self-similar expansion. And it seems to be a feature of this term that Einstein introduced into his cosmology for the wrong reason. He wanted a universe that was static. He put this new term into his cosmology to make it make sense. It's called the cosmological constant. And then when he got convinced that the universe had a Big Bang, he retracted it, complaining that this was his greatest blunder. The trouble is it wasn't a blunder, it was actually right. Very ironic. And so the universe seems to be behaving with this cosmological constant. Okay, so this universe is expanding and expanding. What's going to happen in the future? Well, it gets more and more boring for a while. What's the most interesting thing in the universe? Well, there's black holes. The black holes more or less gulp down the entire clusters of galaxies. It'll swallow up most of our galaxy. We will run into an Andromeda galaxy's black hole. That black hole will swallow our one. They'll get bigger and bigger, and they'll basically swallow up the whole cluster of galaxies. Gulp it all down. Pretty well all. Most of it. Maybe not all. Most of it. Okay, and then that'll happen to... There'll be just these black holes around. Pretty boring, but still not as boring as it's going to get. It's going to get more boring because these black holes, you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait an unbelievable length of time, and Hawking's black hole evaporation starts to come in. And the black holes, it's incredibly tedious, finally evaporate away. Each one goes away, disappears with a pop at the end. what could be more boring? That it was boring then. Now this is really boring. There's nothing, not even black holes. The universe gets colder and colder and colder and colder. And I thought, this is very, very boring. Now that's not science, is it? But it's emotional. So I thought, who's going to be bored by this universe? Not us. We won't be around. It'll be mostly photons running around. And what the photons do, they don't get bored because it's part of relativity, you see. It's not really that they don't experience anything. That's not the point. That photons get right out to infinity without experience any time. It's the way relativity works. And this was part of what I used to do in my old days when I was looking at gravitational radiation and how things behaved in infinity. Infinity is just like another place. You can squash it down. As long as you don't have any mass in the world, infinity is just another place. The photons get there. The gravitons get there. What do they get? They run into infinity. They say, well, now I'm here, what do I? There's something on the other side, is there? The usual view, it's just a mathematical notion. There's nothing on the other side. That's just the boundary of it. A nice example is this beautiful series of pictures by the Dutch artist M.C. Escher. You may know them. The one's called Circle Limits. They're a very famous one with the angels and the devils. And you can see them crowding and crowding and crowding up to the edge. Now, the kind of geometry that these angels and devils inhabit, that's their infinity. But from our perspective, infinity is just is a place. Okay,
sorry, can you just take a brief pause?
Yes.
And just the word you're saying, infinity is just a place. So, for the most part, infinity, sort of even just going back,
yes,
infinity is a mathematical concept.
I think this is one of the
You think there's an actual physical manifest? Like, in which way does infinity ever manifest itself in our physical universe?
Well, it does in various places. You see, it's a thing that if you're not a mathematician, you think, oh, infinity, I can't think about that. Mathematicians think about infinity all the time. Yeah. They get used to the idea and they just play around with different kinds of infinities and it becomes no problem. But yeah, you just have to take my word for it. Now, one of the things is, you see, you take a Euclidean geometry. Well, it just keeps on going and it goes out to infinity. Now, there's other kinds of geometry, and this is what's called hyperbolic geometry. It's a bit like Euclidean geometry, it's a little bit different. It's like what Escher was trying to describe in his Angels and Devils. And he learned about this from Coxeter. And he think that's a very nice thing. I try and represent this infinity to this kind of geometry. So it's not quite Euclidean geometry, it's a bit like it, that the angels and the devils inhabit. And their infinity, by this nice transformation, you squash their infinity down, so you can draw it as this nice circle boundary to their universe. Now, from our outside perspective, we can see their infinity as this boundary. Now, what I'm saying is that it's very like that. The infinity that we might experience, like those angels and devils in their world, can be thought of as a boundary. Now, I found this a very useful way of talking about radiation, gravitational radiation, and things like that. It was a trick, mathematical trick. So now what I'm saying is that mathematical trick becomes real. That somehow the photons, they need to go somewhere, because from their perspective, infinity is just another place. Now, this is a difficult idea to get your mind around. So that's why one of the reasons cosmologists are finding a lot of trouble taking me seriously. But to me, it's not such a wild idea. What's on the other side of that infinity? You have to think, why am I allowed to think of this? Because photons don't have any mass. And we in physics have beautiful ways of measuring time. They are incredibly precise clocks. Atomic and nuclear clocks, unbelievably precise. Why are they so precise? Because of the two most famous equations of 20th century physics. One of them is Einstein's E equals mc squared. What's that tell us? Energy and mass are equivalent. The other one is even older than that, still 20th century, only just. Max Planck, E equals h nu. Nu is a frequency, h is a constant again like c, E is energy. Energy and frequency are equivalent. Put the two together, energy and mass are equivalent, Einstein, energy and frequency are equivalent, Max Planck. Put the two together, mass and frequency are equivalent. Absolutely basic physical principle. If you have a massive entity, a massive particle, it is a clock with a very, very precise frequency. It's not, you can't directly use it, you have to scale it down. So your atomic and nuclear clocks, but that's the basic principle. You scale it down to something you can actually perceive. But it's the same principle. If you have mass, you have beautiful clocks. But the other side of that coin is, if you don't have mass, you don't have clocks. If you don't have clocks, you don't have rulers. You don't have scale.
So you don't have space and time.
You don't have a measure of the scale of space and time.
Scale
so you
of
have
space
to,
and time.
you do have the structure, what's called the conformal structure. You see, it's what the angels and devils have. If you look at the eye of the devil, no matter how close to the boundary it is, it has the same shape, but it has a different size. So you can scale up and you can scale down, but you mustn't change the shape. So it's basically the same idea, but applied to space-time now. In the very remote future, you have things which don't measure the scale, but the shape, if you like, is still there. Now that's in the remote future. Now I'm going to do the exact opposite. Now I'm going to go way back into the Big Bang. Now as you get there, things get hotter and hotter, denser and denser. What's the universe dominated by? Particles moving around almost with the speed of light. When they get almost with the speed of light, okay, they begin to lose the mass too. So for a completely opposite reason, they lose the sense of scale as well. So my crazy idea is the Big Bang and the remote future, they seem completely different. One is extremely dense, extremely hot. The other's very, very rarefied and very, very cold. But if you squash one down by this conformal scaling, you get the other. So although they look and feel very different, they're really almost the same. The remote future, on the other side, I'm claiming is that, where do the photons go? They go into the next Big Bang. You've got to get your mind around that crazy idea.
Taking a step on the other side of the place that is infinity. Okay,
yes.
But...
so I'm saying the other side of our Big Bang, now I'm going back into the Big Bang.
Backwards.
There was the remote future of a previous eon.
Previous eon.
And what I'm saying is that previous eon, there are signals coming through to us which we can see and which we do see. And these are both signals, the two main signals are to do with black holes. One of them is the collisions between black holes, and as they spiral into each other, they release a lot of energy in the form of gravitational waves. Those gravitational waves get through in a certain form into the next eon.
That's fascinating that there's some, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that means that some information can travel
Yes,
from another eon.
exactly.
That is fascinating. I've seen somewhere described sort of the discussion of the Fermi paradox. That if there's intelligent life,
Yes.
communication immediately takes you there. So
We have
do
a
you think-
paper, I have my colleague Vahir Gurzajan, who I worked with on these ideas for a while. We have a crazy paper on that, yes.
So
Looking at the Fermi paradox, yes.
right. So if the universe is just cycling over and over and over, punctuated by
Yep.
punctuated the singularity of the Big Bang,
Yes.
and then intelligent or any kind of intelligent systems can communicate through from eon to eon. Why haven't we heard anything from our alien friends?
Because we don't know how to look.
That's fundamentally the reason.
I don't know. You see, it's speculation. I mean, the SETI program is a reasonable thing to do, but still speculation. It's trying to say, okay, maybe not too far away was a civilization which got there first, before us, early enough that they could send us signals, but how far away would you need to go before? I don't know. We've so little knowledge about that. We haven't seen any signals yet, but it's worth looking. It's worth looking. What I'm trying to say, here's another possible place where you might look. Now you're not looking at civilizations which got there first. You're looking at those civilizations which were so successful, probably a lot more successful than we're likely to be by the looks of things, which knew how to handle their own global warming or whatever it is, and to get through it all and to live to a ripe old age in the sense of a civilization, to the extent that they could harness signals that they could propagate through for some reason of their own desires, whatever we would know, to other civilizations which might be able to pick up the signals. But what kind of signals would they be? I haven't the foggiest.
Let me ask the question.
Yes.
What to you is the most beautiful idea in physics or mathematics or the art at the intersection of the two?
I'm going to have to say complex analysis. I might have said infinities. One of the most beautiful idea, I think, was the fact that you can have infinities of different sizes and so on. But that's, in a way, I think, complex analysis. It's got so much magic in it. It's a very simple idea. You take these, okay, so you take numbers, you take the integers, and then you fill them up into the fractions and the real numbers. You imagine you're trying to measure a continuous line. And then you think of how you can solve equations. Then what about x squared equals minus 1? Well, there's no real number which satisfies that. So you have to think of, well, there's a number called I. You think you invent it. Well, in a certain sense, it's there already. But this number, when you add that square root of minus 1 to it, you have what's called the complex numbers. And they're an incredible system. If you like, you put one little thing in, you put square root of minus 1 in, and you get how much benefit out of it. All sorts of things that you'd never imagined before. And it's that amazing, all hiding there in putting that square root of minus 1 in.
So in a sense,
I think that's the most magical thing I've seen in mathematics or physics. And it's in quantum mechanics.
And in quantum mechanics.
You see, it's
right.
there already. You might think, what's it doing there? Okay, just a nice, beautiful piece of mathematics. And then suddenly we see, nope. It's the very crucial basis of quantum mechanics.
So on the
there in the way the world works.
So on the question of whether math is discovered or invented, it sounds like you may be suggesting that partially it's possible that math is indeed discovered.
Oh, absolutely, yes. No, it's more like archaeology than you might think. Yes, yes.
So let me ask the most ridiculous, but maybe the most important question. What is the meaning of life? What gives your life fulfillment, purpose, happiness, and meaning? Why do you think we're here on this? Given all the Big Bang and the infinities of photons that we've talked about.
All I would say, I think it's not a stupid question. I mean, there are some people, many of my colleagues, new scientists, and they say, well, that's a stupid question, meaning, well, we're just here because things came together and produced life and so what. I think there's more to it. But what there is that's more to it, I have really much idea.
And it might be somehow connected to the mechanisms of consciousness that we've been talking about, the mystery there.
Yeah. It's connected with all sorts of, I think these things are tied up in ways which are, you see, I tend to think the mystery of consciousness is tied up with the mystery of quantum mechanics and how it fits in with the classical world, and that's all to do with the mystery of complex numbers. And there are mysteries there which look like mathematical mysteries, but they seem to have a bearing on the way the physical world operates. We're scratching the surface. We have a long, huge way to go before we really understand that.
And it's a beautiful idea that the depth, the mathematical depth could be discovered. And then there's tragedies of Gato's incompleteness along the way that we'll have to somehow figure our ways around.
Yeah.
So, Roger, it was a huge honor to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with Roger Penrose, and thank you to our presenting sponsor, Cash App. Please consider supporting this podcast by getting ExpressVPN at expressvpn.com/LexPod and downloading Cash App and using code LEXPODCAST. If you enjoy this podcast, subscribe on YouTube, review it with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, support it on Patreon, or simply connect with me on Twitter at Lex Friedman. And now, let me leave you with some words of wisdom that Roger Penrose wrote in his book, The Emperor's New Mind. Beneath all this technicality is the feeling that it is indeed, quote-unquote, obvious that the conscious mind cannot work like a computer, even though much of what is involved in mental activity might do so. This is the kind of obviousness that a child can see, though the child may later in life become browbeaten into believing that the obvious problems are quote-unquote non-problems, to be argued into non-existence by careful reasoning and clever choices of definition. Children sometimes see things clearly that are obscured in later life. We often forget the wonder that we felt as children when the cares of the quote-unquote real world have begun to settle on our shoulders. Children are not afraid to pose basic questions that may embarrass us as adults to ask. What happens to each of our streams of consciousness after we die? Where was it before we were born? Might we become or have been someone else? Why do we perceive it all? Why are we here? Why is there a universe here at all in which we can actually be? These are puzzles that tend to come with the awakenings of awareness in any of us, and, no doubt, with the awakening of self-awareness within whichever creature or other entity it first came. Thank you for listening, and hope to see you next time. The following is a conversation with Sam Harris, one of the most influential and pioneering thinkers of our time. He's the host of the Making Sense podcast and the author of many seminal books on human nature and the human mind, including The End of Faith, The Moral Landscape, Lying, Free Will, and Waking Up. He also has a meditation app called Waking Up that I've been using to guide my own meditation. Quick mention of our sponsors: National Instruments, Belcampo, Athletic Greens, and Linode. Check them out in the description to support this podcast. As a side note, let me say that Sam has been an inspiration to me, as he has been for many, many people. First from his writing, then his early debates, maybe 13, 14 years ago on the subject of faith, his conversations with Christopher Hitchens, and since 2013, his podcast. I didn't always agree with all of his ideas, but I was always drawn to the care and depth of the way he explored those ideas, the calm and clarity amid the storm of difficult, at times controversial. The following is a conversation with Kevin Spacey, a two-time Oscar-winning actor who has starred in Seven, The Usual Suspects, American Beauty, and House of Cards. He is one of the greatest actors ever, creating haunting performances of characters who often embody the dark side of human nature. 7 years ago, he was cut from House of Cards and canceled by Hollywood and the world when Anthony Rapp made an allegation that Kevin Spacey sexually abused him in 1986. Anthony Rapp then filed a civil lawsuit seeking $40 million. In this trial, and all civil and criminal trials that followed, Kevin was acquitted. He has never been found guilty nor liable in the court of law. In this conversation, Kevin makes clear what he did and what he didn't do. I also encourage you to listen to Kevin's Dan Wooten and Allison Pearson interviews for additional details and responses to the allegations. As an aside, let me say that one of the principles I operate under for this podcast and in life is that I will talk with everyone, with empathy and with backbone. For each guest, I hope to explore their life's work, life story, and what and how they think, and do so honestly and fully. The good, the bad, and the ugly, the brilliance and the flaws. I won't whitewash their sins, but I won't reduce them to a worst possible caricature of their sins either. The latter is what the mass hysteria of internet mobs too often does, often rushing to a final judgment before the facts are in. I will try to do better than that, to respect due process, in service of the truth. And I hope to have the courage to always think independently, and to speak honestly, from the heart, even when the eyes of the outrage mob are on me. Again, my goal is to understand human beings, at their best and at their worst. And the hope is such understanding leads to more compassion and wisdom in the world. I will make mistakes. And when I do, I will work hard to improve. I love you all. This is the Lex Friedman Podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, dear friends, here's Kevin Spacey. You played a serial killer in the movie Seven. Your performance was one of, if not the greatest portrayal of a murderer on screen ever. What was your process of becoming him, John Doe, the serial killer?
The truth is, I didn't get the part. I had been in Los Angeles making a couple of films, Swimming with Sharks and Usual Suspects, and then I did a film called Outbreak that Morgan Freeman was in. And I went in to audition for David Fincher in probably late November of '94. And I auditioned for this part and didn't get it. And I went back to New York. And I think they started shooting like December 12th. And I'm in New York, I'm back in I have a wonderful apartment on West 12th Street, and my mom has come to visit for Christmas. And it's December 23rd. And it's like 7 o'clock at night, and my phone rings. And it's Arnold Kopelson, who's the producer of Seven. And he's very jovial, and he's very friendly, and he says, "How you doing?" And I said, "Fine." And he said, "Listen, do you remember that film you came in for, Seven?" And I said, yeah, absolutely. He goes, "Well, turns out that we hired an actor, and we started shooting, and then yesterday, David fired him. And David would like you to get on a plane on Sunday and come to Los Angeles and start shooting on Tuesday." And I was like, okay. Would it be imposing to say, can I read it again? Because it's been a while now, and I'd like to. So they sent a script over. I read the script that night. I thought about it. And I had this feeling, I can't even quite describe it, but I had this feeling that it would be really good if I didn't take billing in the film. And the reason I felt that was because I knew that by the time this film would come out, it would be the last one of the 3 movies that I just shot, the 4th one. And if any of those films broke through or did well, if it was going to be Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Kevin Spacey, and you don't show up for the first 25, 30, 40 minutes, people are going to figure out who you're playing.
So people should know that you play the serial killer in the movie, and serial killer shows up like more than halfway through the movie.
Very latest
one. And when you say billing, it's like the posters, the VHS cover, everything. Right. You're gone. You're not there.
Not there. And so New Line Cinema told me to go fuck myself. That they absolutely could use my picture and my image and blah. And this became a little bit of a, I'd say, 24-hour conversation. And it was Fincher who said, "I actually think this is a really cool idea." So the compromise was, I'm the first credit at the end of the movie when the credits start. So I got on a plane on that Sunday, and I flew to Los Angeles, and I went into where they were shooting, and I went into the makeup room, and David Fincher was there, and we were talking about what should I do, how should I look, and I just had my hair short for Outbreak because I was playing a military character, and I just looked at the hairdresser and I said, "Do you have a razor?" And Fincher went, "Are you kidding?" And I said, "No." He goes, "If you shave your head, I'll shave mine." So we both shaved our heads. And then I started shooting the next day. So my long-winded answer to your question is that I didn't have that much time to think about how to build that character. what I think in the end Fincher was able to do so brilliantly with such terror was to set the audience up to meet this character.
I think the last scene, the ending scene, and the car ride leading up to it, where it's mostly on you, in conversation with Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt, is one of the greatest scenes in film history. So if people somehow didn't see the movie, there's these 5 murders that happen that are inspired by 5 of the 7 deadly sins, and the ending scene is inspired, represents the last 2 deadly sins. And there's this calm subtlety about you in your performance. It's just terrifying. Maybe in contrast with Brad Pitt's performance, that's also really strong. But in the contrast is the terrifying sense that you get in the audience that builds up to the twist at the end, or the surprise at the end, with the famous "What's in the box" from Brad Pitt.
Right.
That is Brad Pitt's character's wife, her head.
Yeah. I can really only tell you that while we were shooting that scene in the car, while we were out in the desert, in that place where all those electrical wires were, David just kept saying, less. Do less. And I just tried to, I remember he kept saying to me, remember, you're in control. Like, you're going to win. And knowing that should allow you to have tremendous confidence. And I just followed that lead. And I just think it's the kind of film that so many of the elements that had been at work from the beginning of the movie, in terms of its style, in terms of how he built this terror, in terms of how he built for the audience a sense of this person being one of the scariest people they might ever encounter. It really allowed me to be able to not have to do that much, just say the words and mean them. And I think it also it's an example of what makes tragedy so difficult. Very often tragedy is people operating without enough information. They don't have all the facts. Romeo and Juliet, they don't have all the facts. They don't know what we know as an audience. And so in the end, whether Brad Pitt's character ends up shooting John Doe or turning the gun on himself, which was a discussion. There were a number of alternative endings that were discussed. Nothing ends up being tied up in a nice little bow. It is complicated and shows how nobody wins in the end when you're not operating with all the information.
When you say the words and mean them, what does mean them mean?
I've been very fortunate to be directed by Fincher a couple of times, and he would say to me sometimes, I don't believe a thing that is coming out of your mouth. Shall we try it again? And you go, okay, yeah, we can try it again. And sometimes he'll do take, and then you'll look to see if he has any added genius to hand you, and he just goes, let's do it again, and then let's do it again. And sometimes I say this in all humility, he's literally trying to beat the acting out of you. And by continually saying, do it again, do it again, do it again, and not giving you any specifics, he is systematically shredding you of all pretense, of all, because look, very often, actors, we come in on the set and we've thought about the scene and we've worked out, I've got this prop and I'm going to do this thing with a can, I'm going to, all these things, all the tea, I'm going to do a thing with the thing. And David is the kind of director where he just wants you to stop adding all that crap and just say the words and say them quickly and mean them. And it takes a while to get to that place. I'll tell you a story. This is a story I just love because it's in exactly the same wheelhouse. So Jack Lemmon's first movie was a film called It Should Happen to You, and it was directed by George Cukor. And Jack tells this story, and it was just an incredibly charming story to hear Jack tell.
He said, so I'm doing this picture, and let me tell you, this is a terrific part for me. And I'm doing a scene. It's on my first day. It's my first day, and it's a terrific scene. And he goes, we do the first take, and George Cukor comes up to me and he says, Jack, I said, yeah. He said, let's do another one, but just do a little less in this one. And Jack said, a little less than what I just did. He said, yeah, just a little less. So he goes, we do another take. And I think, boy, that was it. I mean, let's just go home. And Cukor walked up to him and said, Jack, let's do another one. This time just a little bit less. And Jack said, less than what I just did now? He said, yeah, just a little bit less. He goes, oh, okay. So they did another take. And Cukor came up and he said, Jack, just a little bit less. And Jack said, a little less than what I just did? He said, yes. He goes, well, if I do any less, I'm not going to be acting. And Cukor said, exactly, Jack, exactly.
I mean, I guess what you're saying is it's extremely difficult to get to the bottom of a little less. Because the power, if we just think even on 7, of your performance is in the tiniest of subtleties. Like when you say, oh, you didn't know, and you turn your head a little bit. And a little bit like the little bit, maybe a glimmer of a smile appears in your face. That's subtlety. That's less. That's hard to get to, I suppose.
Yeah. And also because I so well remember, I think the work that Brad did and also Morgan did in that scene, but the work that Brad had to do, where he had to go. I remember rehearsing with him as we were all staying at this little hotel nearby that location, and we rehearsed the night before we started shooting that sequence, and it was just incredible to see the levels of emotions he had to go through, and then the decision of what do I do? Because if I do what he wants me to do, then he wins. But if I don't do it, then what kind of a husband am I? I just thought he did really incredible work. So it was also not easy to not react to the power of what he was throwing at me. I just thought it was an extraordinary, a really extraordinary scene.
So what's it like being in that scene? So it's you, Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, and Brad Pitt is going over the top, just having a mental breakdown, and is weighing these extremely difficult moral choices, as you're saying. But he's like screaming and in pain and tormented, while you're very subtly smiling.
In terms of the writing and in terms of what the characters had to do, it was an incredible culmination of how this character could manipulate in the way that he did, and in the end succeed.
You mentioned Fincher likes to do a lot of takes. That's the famous thing about David Fincher. So what are the pros and cons of that? I think I read that he does some crazy amount. He averages 25 to 65 takes, and most directors do less than 10. So
yeah, sometimes it's timing. Sometimes it's literally he has a stopwatch and he's timing how long a scene is taking. And then he'll say, you need to take a minute off this scene. Like a minute? Yeah, a minute off this scene. I want it to move like this. So let's pick it up. Let's pick up the pace. Let's see if we can take a minute off.
Why the speed? Why say it fast is the important thing?
I think because Fincher hates indulgence. And he wants people to talk the way they do in life. Which is, we don't take big dramatic pauses.
Yeah, right.
Before we speak. We say what we want.
And I guess actors like the dramatic pauses and the indulge in the dramatic
They didn't
pauses.
always like the dramatic pauses. I mean, look, you go back, any student of acting, you go back to the 30s and the 40s, 50s. The speed at which actors spoke. Not just in the comedies, which, of course, you look at any Preston Sturges movie, and it's incredible how fast people are talking, and how funny things are when they happen that fast. But then, acting styles changed. We got into a different kind of thing in the late 50s and 60s, and a lot of actors are feeling it, which is, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just that if you want to keep an audience engaged, as Fincher does, and I believe successfully does in all of his work, pace, timing, movement, clarity, speed are admirable to achieve.
And all of that, he wants the actor to be as natural as possible, to strip away all the bullshit of acting.
Yeah.
And become human.
Look, I've been lucky with other directors. Sam Mendes is similar. I remember when I walked in to maybe the first rehearsal for Richard III that we were doing, and I had brought with me a canopy of ailments that my Richard was going to suffer from. And Sam, eventually whittled it down to like 3, like maybe your arm and maybe your thing and maybe your leg, but let's get rid of the other 10 things that you brought into the room, because I was so excited to capture this character. So very often Trevor Nunn is this way. A lot of wonderful directors I've worked with, they're really good at helping you trim and edit.
David Fincher said about you, he was talking in general, I think, but also specifically in the moment of House of Cards, said that you have exceptional skill both as an actor and as a performer, which he says are different things. So he defines the former as dramatization of a text and the latter as the seduction of an audience. Do you see wisdom in that distinction? And what does it take to do both? The dramatization of a text and the seduction of an audience.
Those are two very interesting descriptions. When I think performer, I tend to think entertaining. I tend to think comedy. I tend to think winning over an audience. I tend to think that there's something about that quality of wanting to have people enjoy themselves. And when you saddle that against what maybe he means as an actor, which is more dramatic or more text driven, more. Look, I've always believed that my job. Not every actor feels this way, but my job, the way that I've looked at it, is that my job is to serve the writing. And that if I serve the writing, I will, in a sense, serve myself, because I'll be in the right world, I'll be in the right context, I'll be in the right style. I'll have embraced what a director's, it's not my painting, it's someone else's painting. I'm a series of colors in someone else's painting. And the barometer for me has always been that when people stop me and talk to me about a character I played and reference their name as if they actually exist, that's when I feel like I've gotten close to doing my job.
Yeah, one of the challenges for me in this conversation is remembering that your name is Kevin, not Frank or John or any of these characters, because live deeply in the psyche.
To me, that's the greatest compliment for me as an actor. I love being able to go. I mean, when I think about performers who inspire me, and I remember when I was young and I was introduced to Spencer Tracy, Henry Fonda, Katharine Hepburn, I believed who they were. I knew nothing about them. They were just these extraordinary characters doing this extraordinary stuff. And then I think more recently contemporary, when I think of the work that Philip Seymour Hoffman did and Heath Ledger and people that when I think about what they could be doing, what they could do, what they would have done had they stayed with us, I'm so excited when I go into a cinema or I go into a play and I completely am taken to some place that I believe exists and characters that become real.
And those characters become like lifelong companions. Like for me, they travel with you, and even if it's the darkest aspects of human nature, they're always there. It almost like, I feel like I almost met them and gotten to know them and gotten to become like friends with them almost. Hannibal Lecter, whether it's or Forrest Gump.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I feel like I'm like best friends with Forrest Gump. I know the guy, and I guess he's played by some guy named Tom, but like Forrest Gump is the guy I'm friends with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that everybody feels like that when they're in the audience with great characters. They just kind of, they become part of you in some way. The good, the bad, and the ugly of them.
One of the things that I feel that I try to do in my work is when I read something for the first time, when I read a script, a play, and I am absolutely devastated by it. It is the most extraordinary, the most beautiful, the most life-affirming or terrifying. It's then a process, weirdly, of working backwards, because I want to work in such a way that that's the experience I give to the audience when they first see it, that they have the experience I had when I read it. I remember that there's been times in the creative process when something was pointed out to me or something was, I remember I was doing a play and I was having this really tough time with one of the last scenes in the play, and I just couldn't figure it out. I was in rehearsal, and although we had a director in that play, I called a friend of mine who was also director, and I had him come over, and I said, look, this scene, I'm just having the toughest, I cannot seem to crack this scene. And so we read it through a couple of times, and then this wonderful director named John Swanbeck, who would eventually direct me in a film called The Big Kahuna. But this before that, he said to me the most incredible thing. He just said, all right, what's the last line you have in this scene before you fall over and fall asleep? And I said, the last line is, that last drink, the old KO. And he went, okay, I want you to think about what that line actually means and then work backwards. And so he left, and I sort of was left with this, what? Like, what does that mean? How am I supposed to? And then like a couple of days went by, and I thought, okay, so I said, what does that line actually mean? Well, that last drink, the old KO. KO is knockout, which is a boxing term. It's the only boxing term the writer uses in the play. And then I went back and I realized my friend was so smart and so incredible to have, said, ask a question you haven't thought of asking yet. I realized that the playwright wrote the last round, the 8th round between these two brothers, and it was a fight. Physical as well as emotional. And when I brought that into the rehearsal room to the director who's doing that play, he liked that idea, and we staged that scene as if it was the 8th round, although the audience wouldn't have known that. But just what I loved about that was that somebody said to me, ask yourself a question you haven't asked yourself yet. What does that line mean? And then work backwards.
What is that, like a catalyst for thinking deeply about what is magical about this play, this story, this narrative? That's what that is, like thinking backwards. That's what that does.
Yeah, and but also because it's this incredible. Why didn't I think to ask that question myself? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what you have directors for. That's what you have, so many places where ideas can come from. But that just illustrates that even though in my brain I always like to work backwards, I missed it in that one, and I'm very grateful to my friend for having pushed me into being able to realize what that meant. And
To ask the interesting question, I like the poetry and the humility of, I'm just a series of colors in someone else's painting. That was a good line. That said, you've talked about improvisation. You said that it's all about the ability to do it again and again and again, and yet never make it the same. And you also just said that you're trying to stay true to the text. So where's the room for the improvisation, that it's never the same?
well, there's two slightly different contexts, I think. One is in the rehearsal room. Improvisation can be a wonderful device. I mean, Sam Mendes, for example, he'll start a scene, and he does this wonderful thing. He brings rugs and he brings chairs, sofas in, and he says, "Well, let's put two chairs here and here. You guys, let's start in these chairs far apart from each other. Let's see what happens with the scene if you're that far apart." And so we'll do the scene that way. And then he goes, "Okay, let's bring a rug in, and let's bring these chairs much closer, and let's see what happens if the space between you is." And so then you try it that way. And then, it's a little harder in Shakespeare to improv. But in any situation where you want to try and see where could a scene go? Where would the scene go if I didn't make that choice? Where would the scene go if I made this choice? Where would the scene go if I didn't say that or I said something else? So that's how improv can be a valuable process to learn about limits and boundaries and what's going on with a character that somehow you discover in trying something that isn't on the page. Then there's the different thing, which is the trying to make it fresh and trying to make it new, and that is really a reference to theater. I'll put it to you this way. Anybody loves sports, right? So you go and you watch on a pitch, you watch on a tennis game, you watch basketball, you watch football. Yeah, the rules are the same, but it's a different game every time you're out on that court or on that field. It's no different in theater. Yes, it's the same lines, maybe even blocking is similar. But what's different is attack, intention, how you are growing in a role and watching your fellow actors grow in theirs, and how every night it's a new audience and they're reacting differently. And you literally, where you can go from week 1 of performances in a play to week 12 is extraordinary. And the difference between theater and film is that no matter how good someone might think you are in a movie, you'll never be any better. It's frozen. Whereas I can be better tomorrow night than I was tonight. I can be better in a week than I was tonight. It is a living, breathing, shifting, changing, growing thing every single day.
But also in theater, there's no safety net. If you fuck it up, everybody gets to see you do that.
And if you start giggling on stage, everyone gets to see you do that too, which I am very guilty of.
I mean, there is something of a seduction of an audience in theater even more intense than there is when you're talking about film. I got a chance to watch the documentary Now in the Wings on a World Stage, which is behind the scenes of, you mentioned you teaming up with Sam Mendes in 2011 to stage Richard III, played by William Shakespeare. I was also surprised to learn you haven't really done much Shakespeare, or at least you said that in the in the movie. But there's a lot of interesting behind the scenes stuff there. First of all, the camaraderie of everybody, how like the bond theater creates, especially when you're traveling. But another interesting thing you mentioned with the chairs of Sam Mendes trying different stuff, it seemed like everybody was really open to trying stuff, embarrassing themselves, taking risks, all of that. I suppose that's part of acting in general, but theater especially. Just take risks. It's okay to embarrass the shit out of yourself, including the director.
And it's also because you become a family. You know, it's unlike a movie where, you know, I might have a scene with so-and-so on this day and then another scene with them in a week and a half, and then that's the only scenes we have in the whole movie together. Every single day, when you show up in the rehearsal room, it's the whole company. You're all up for it every day. You're learning, you're growing, you're trying, and there is an incredible trust that happens. And I was, of course, fortunate that some of the things I learned and observed about being a part of that family, being included in that family, and being a part of creating that family, I was able to observe from people like Jack Lemmon, who led many companies that I was fortunate to work in and be a part of.
There's also a sad moment where at the end everybody is really sad to say goodbye, because you do form a family and then it's over. I guess somebody said that's just part of theater. It's like, I mean, there's a kind of assumed goodbye and that this is it.
Yeah, and also there are some times when, like 6 months later, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll go, that's how to play that scene.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I just finally figured it out.
So maybe you could speak a little bit more to that. What's the difference between film acting and live theater acting?
I don't really think there is any. I think there's just... You eventually learn about yourself on film. You know, when I first did, like, my first episode of The Equalizer, you know, it's horrible. It's just so bad. But I didn't know about myself. So slowly you begin to learn about yourself. But I think good acting is good acting. And I think that, you know, if a camera's right here, you know that your front row is also your back row. You just don't have to do so much. There is, in theater, a particular kind of energy, almost like an athlete, that you have to have vocally to be able to get up 7 performances a week and never lose your voice and always be there and always be alive and always be doing the best work you can, that you just don't require in film. You know, you don't have to have the same, it just doesn't require the same kind of stamina that doing a play does.
It just feels like also in theater, you have to become the character more intensely because you can't take a break. You can't take a bathroom break. You're like on stage. This is you.
Yeah, but you have no idea what's going on stage with the actors. I mean, I have literally laughed through speeches that I had to give because my fellow actors were putting carrots up their nose or broccoli in their ears or doing whatever they were doing to make me laugh.
So they're just having fun.
They're having the time of their life. And by the way, Judi Dench is the worst giggler of all.
Yeah.
I mean, they had to bring the curtain down on her and Maggie Smith because they were laughing so hard they could not continue the play.
So even when you're doing like a dramatic monologue, they're still fucking with you.
There's stuff.
Okay, that's great. That's good to know. You also said, interesting line, that improvisation helps you learn about the character. Can you explain that? So like through maybe playing with the different ways of saying the words, or the different ways to bring the words to life, you get to learn about yourself, about the character you're playing.
It can be helpful. But improv is, I'm such a big believer in the writing and in serving the writing and doing the words the writer wrote. That improv for me, unless you're just doing like comedy, and I love improv, and in comedy it's brilliant. So much fun to watch people just come up with something right there. But that's where you're looking for laughs, and you're specifically in a little scene that's being created. But I think improv has had value. But I have not experienced it as much in doing plays as I have sometimes in doing film, where you'll start off rehearsing, and a director may say, "Let's just go off book and see what happens." And I've had moments in film where someone went off book, and it was terrifying. There was a scene I had in Glengarry Glen Ross where the character I play has fucked something up. It's just screwed something up. And Pacino is livid. And so we had this scene where Al is walking like this, and the camera is moving with him, and he is shooing me a new asshole. And in the middle of the take, Al starts talking about me. Oh, Kevin, you don't think we know how you got this job? You don't think we know whose dick you've been sucking on to get this part in this movie? And I'm literally like, I don't know what the hell is happening, but I'm reacting. We got to the end of that take. Al walked up to me and he went, "Oh, that was so good. Oh my God, that was so good. Just so you know, the sound." I asked them not to be cold. So, you have no doubt. So it's just me. Oh, that was so good. You look like a car wreck. And I was like, yeah. And it was actually an incredibly generous thing that he gave me so that I would react.
Oh, wow. Did they use that shot? Because you were the shot.
It was my close-up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, that's the take.
That was an intense interaction. I mean, what was it like, if we can just linger on that, just that intense scene with Al Pacino?
Well, he's the reason I got the movie. A lot of people might think because Jack was in the film that he had something to do with it, but actually I was doing a play called Lost in Yonkers on Broadway. And we had the same dresser who'd worked with him, a girl named Laura. It was wonderful. Laura Beatty. And she told Al that he should come and see this play because she wanted to see me in this play. I was playing this gangster. It was fun part. So I didn't know Pacino came on some night and saw this play. And then like 3 days later, I got a call to come in and audition for this Glengarry Glen Ross, which of course I knew as a play, David Mamet's play. And then I auditioned. Jamie Foley was the director, who would eventually direct a bunch of House of Cards. Wonderful, wonderful guy. And I got the part. Well, I didn't quite get the part. They were going to bring together the actors that they thought they were going to give the parts to on a Saturday at Al's office. And they asked me if I would come and do a read-through. And I said, "Who's going to be there?" And they said, "Well, so-and-so and so-and-so and so." And then Jack Lemmon is flying in. And I said, "Don't tell Mr. Lemmon that I'm doing the read-through. Is that possible?" And they were like, "Sure." So I'll never forget this. Jack was sitting in a chair in Pacino's office doing the New York Times crossword puzzle as he did every day. And I walked in the door and he went, "Oh, Jesus Christ. Is it possible you can get a job without me? Jesus Christ. I'm so tired of holding up your end of it. Oh my God, Jesus." So I got the job because of Pacino, and it was really one of the first major roles that I ever had in a film. And to be working with that group.
Yeah, that's like one of the greatest ensemble casts ever. We got Al Pacino, Jack Lemmon, Alec Baldwin, Alan Arkin, Ed Harris, you, Jonathan Pryce. It's just incredible. And I have to say, I mean, maybe you can comment. You've talked about how much of a mentor and a friend Jack Lemmon has been. That's one of his greatest performances ever.
Ever.
You have a scene at the end of the movie with him that was really powerful, like firing on all cylinders. You're playing disdain to perfection, and he's playing desperation to perfection. What a scene. What was that like? Just like at the top of your game, the two of you.
Well, by that time, we had done Long Day's Journey to Night in the theater. We'd done a mini-series called The Murder of Mary Fagan on NBC. We'd done a film called Dad that Gary David Goldberg directed with Ted Danson. So this was the fourth time we were working together, and we knew each other. He'd become my father figure. And I don't know if you know that I originally met Jack Lemmon when I was very, very young. He was doing a production at the Marte Perform of a Sean O'Casey play called Juno and the Paycock with Walter Matthau and Maureen Stapleton. And on a Saturday in December of 1974, my junior high school drama class went to a workshop. It was called How to Audition. And we did this workshop. Many schools in Southern California were part of this Drama Teachers Association. So we got these incredible experiences of being able to go see professional productions and be involved in these workshops or festivals. So I had to get up and do a monologue in front of Mr. Lemmon when I was 13 years old. And he walked up to me at the end of that, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "That was just terrific." Nice landing. He said, "No, everything I've been talking about, you just did." Yeah, what's your name? I said, "Kevin." He said, "Well, let me tell you something. When you get finished with high school, as I'm sure you're going to go on and do theater, you should go to New York and you should study to be an actor, because this is what you're meant to do with your life." And he was like an idol. And 12 years later, I read in the New York Times that he was coming to Broadway to do this production of A Long Day's Journey to Night, a year and some months after I read this article. And I was like, I'm going to play Jamie in that production. And I then, with a lot of opposition, because the cast and director didn't want to see me, they said that the director, Jonathan Miller, wanted movie actors to play the two sons. And ultimately, I found out that Jonathan Miller, the director, was coming to New York to do a series of lectures at Alice Tully Hall. And I went to try to figure out how I could maybe meet him. And I was sitting in that theater listening to this incredible lecture he was doing. And sitting next to me was an elderly woman. I mean, elderly, 80-something, and she was asleep. But sticking out of her handbag, which was on the floor, was a invitation to a cocktail reception in honor of Dr. Jonathan Miller. And so I thought, she's tired. She's probably going to go home. So I took that and walked into this cocktail reception and ultimately went over to Dr. Miller, who was incredibly kind, and said, "Sit down. I'm always very curious what brings young people to my lectures." And I said to him, "Eugene O'Neill brought me here." And he was like, What? I've always wanted to meet him. Where is he?" And I told him that I'd been trying for 7 months to get an audition for A Long Day's Journey, and that his American cast directors were telling my agents that he wanted big American movie stars. And at that moment, he turned and he saw one of those casting directors who was there that night. So I knew he was going to be in New York starting auditions that week. And she was staring daggers at me, and he just got it. And he said, "Does someone have a pen?" And he took the little paper and started writing. He said, "Listen, Kevin, there are many situations in which casting directors have a lot of say and a lot of power and a lot of leverage. And then there are other situations where they just take directors' messages. And on this one, they're taking my messages. This is where I'm staying. Make sure you people get to me. We start auditions on Thursday." And on Thursday, I had an opportunity to come in and audition for this play that I've been working on and preparing. And at the end of it, I did 4 scenes. At the end of it, he said to me that unless someone else came in and blew him against the wall like I had just done, as far as he was concerned, I pretty much had the part, but I couldn't tell my agents that yet because I had to come back and read with Mr. Lemon. And so 3 months later, in August of 1985, I found myself in a room with Jack Lemmon again at 890 Broadway, which is where they rehearsed a lot of the Broadway plays. And we did 4 scenes together, and I was toppling over him. I was pushing him. I was relentless. And I'll never forget at the end of that, Lemon came over to me. He put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "That was your touch of terrific. I never thought we'd find the rotten kid, but he's it. Jesus Christ, what the hell was that?" And I ended up spending the next year of my life with that man.
So it turns out he was right.
Yeah.
This world works in mysterious ways. It also speaks to the fact of the power of somebody you look up to giving words of encouragement, because those can just reverberate through your whole life and just like make the path clear.
We used to joke that if every contract came with a Jack Lemmon clause, it would be a more beautiful world.
Beautifully said. Jack Lemmon is one of the greatest actors ever. What do you think makes him so damn good?
Wow. I think he truly set out in his life to accomplish what his father said to him on his deathbed. His father was dying. His father was, by the way, called the Donut King in Boston. And not in the entertainment business at all. He was literally owned a donut company. And when he was passing away, Jack said, "The last thing my father said to me was, go out there and spread a little sunshine." And I truly think that's what Jack loved to do. I remember this, and I don't know if this is will answer your question, but I think it's revealing about what he's able to do and what he was able to do and how that ultimately influenced what I was able to do. Sam Mendes had never directed a film before American Beauty. And so what he did was he took the best elements of theater and applied them to the process. So we rehearsed it like a play in a soundstage where everything was laid out like it would be in a play, and this couch will be here. And he'd sent me a couple of tapes. He'd sent me 2 cassette tapes, one that he'd like to call pre-Lester, before he begins to move in a new direction, and then post-Lester. And they just were different songs. And then he said to me one day, and I always thought this was brilliant of Sam to use Lemon, knowing what Lemon meant to me. He said, "When was the last time you watched The Apartment?" And I said, "I don't know. I mean, I love that movie so much." He goes, "I want you to watch it again, and then let's talk." So I went and I watched the movie again. And we sat down and Sam said, "What Lemon does in that film is incredible, because there is never a moment in the movie where we see him change. He just evolves. And he becomes the man he becomes because of the experiences that he has through the course of the film. But there's this remarkable consistency in who he becomes. And that's what I need you to do as Lester. I don't want the audience to ever see him change. I want him to evolve." And so we did first of all, it was just a great direction. And then second of all, we did some things that people don't know we did to aid that gradual shift of that man's character. First of all, I had to be in the best shape from the beginning of the movie because we didn't shoot it in sequence. So I was in this crazy shape. I had this wonderful trainer named Mike Torsha, who just was incredible. But so what we did was, in order to then show this gradual shift, was I had 3 different hair pieces. I had 3 different kinds of costumes of different colors and sizes. And I had different